Okay, what I'm going to do is I am going to get started because people will join and they don't really want to hear me anyway. So welcome everyone to tonight's September meeting of the British Empire Study Group. For those of you who have not joined us before, we are a bunch of philatelists who enjoy the British Empire. We like the social aspects and we like the idea of learning and presenting. So we will be meeting virtually for the foreseeable future. And that's because our home is at the Collectors Club is in transition. We define the British Empire very liberally. So we even include Canada. No, we go all over the place. So if you flew over it, or if you traveled through it, or if we had a post office through it, it's fair game for us here. I'm keeping this short because you really want to hear Garfield. So our next meeting is on September 8th, and that's going to be with Steve Zorinsky hosting a Demystifying the Mystery of the Listing and Pricing of Stamps in the Catalogs. And that's with the editors of Stanley Gibbons and Scott Catalogs. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get going. If you have any questions, this is going to be a little different. Garfield's going to answer them if they're really germane to what he's talking about for that slide. Raise your hand. We're going to unmute you and you could ask your question directly at that time. It's a little different, but that way we stay on point and we're trying to increase your enjoyment of the presentation. If there is a comment or discussion item or something that's very lengthy, and we could hold off until the Q&A or put it in the chat and just wait, and you could talk to Garfield after the presentation in our social, which follows. If you'd like to disable those closed captions, if those are showing up for you and they are annoying, you could just click on the little right-hand button. Sometimes it's three little dots, and you'll see disable subtitles, and that works. We are putting together next year's program, so feel free to shoot us your ideas. So without further ado, I am going to turn you over to Rob, who will introduce Garfield. And all of you should know Rob by now. And Rob, take it away and go for the man of the hour.
Thanks, Joan. Well, welcome to tonight's program, Toronto and its Post Offices, Part 2, 1880 and Beyond. Our program will be presented by the renowned philatelic expert, Garfield Portch. His philatelic interest began in the 1970s with a collection of Canadian postage stamps. By the year 2000, that collection had become increasingly serious, developing into an interest in both research and postal history, exhibiting with a focus on Toronto. In 2008, he was invited to join the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada, and then recruited to volunteer at the Vincent Graves Green Philatelic Research Foundation, where he is now president and chairman of the board of directors and also serves on their expert committee. Garfield's also a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, emeritus member of the British North America Philatelic Society, a member of the Canadian Philatelic Society and of Great Britain, the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, the Institute for Analytic Philately, and the West Toronto Stamp Club. So without further ado, it's my privilege to bring you tonight's esteemed presenter, Garfield Portch.
Thank you, Rob. You gilded the lily a little bit there, I'm afraid. I didn't write all that, but thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. It was great to be back with the British Empire Study Group again. I've enjoyed presenting before, and we'll see if we can have some fun with this presentation tonight. As Joan said, if you've got any questions as we go along, please feel free to ask. There's nothing worse than sitting saying, what the heck has this guy been talking about? So let's say feel free to ask. But if it's something that's going to take a long time, hang on till the end, and I'll hang in and answer questions as long as Joan will keep the meeting open. And after that, I'll give you my email address as well. So I want to look at the period from 1880 to 1901. And the reason I picked those two dates fairly simple. Up until 1880, there was only one post office in Toronto. And we're talking about the expansion from the 1 to 27. And in 1901, on January 29th, Queen Victoria died. So it created the end of an era. But it was also the time that Toronto started opening up the sub post offices with numbers. And I don't like collecting them. They're not much fun anyhow. Some people do like them, but it's just not my cup of tea. But just to make sure everybody's on the same page, when we look at a cover or an envelope for the non-collectors with us, we have several components that are all of some philatelic interest. There's the advertising cachet, often a piece of fairly exquisite art, sometimes just type. So it's a piece of attractive advertising by the sender. The return address is often stuck up in this corner above the cachet, but it could be just about anywhere. It could be an overall cover, but that's just so the post office knows where to send the letter back. Down here, of course, is the destination address. Everybody can be familiar with that. The postage stamp in the upper right corner in most cases. The receiving mark, which contains a date, and sometimes you get a time indicator. Could be AM, PM, NT for night, or it could be the hour of the day, depending on the post office. And then you also have the obliterator or the killer that prevents the reuse of the stamps. This particular cover that I'm using as the example just happens to be the earliest known use of this particular duplex cancellation, the duplex being the date and the killer combined into one hammer. The various types of cancellations that were used in Toronto or date stamps used in Toronto during the particular period, the circular date stamp, which just about every post office in the world has, the double split ring or the single split ring, and they're obvious why they call them those. A duplex, which is a combination of a killer or an obliterator and a circular date stamp. This is the precursor to these squared circles. About 9 cities in Canada used this type of a cancellation, which is really quite attractive, before they switched over to the squared circle, which saw them out of the 20th century. Toronto only had, as I said, one post office up until 1880, and from the period of about 1860 to 1880, this one is it. And the interesting note, and I got taken down after the first presentation because I didn't mention this little building out front of the post office. That's a public lavatory, which has absolutely nothing to do with this discussion, but there it is. The need for the post office to expand is fairly obvious when you look at a growth chart. Back here in 1831, you got a fairly low population, which gradually increased to 1880s. But in 1880, we started to get almost an exponential growth. So there's a huge amount of mail going through the city, and you're up to a population of over 250,000 people. So there was definitely a need for more than one office. So what happened was that the post office department chartered 3 new offices, and they called them Toronto North, Toronto West, and Toronto East. They all opened in 1881, and they hung in with that nomenclature until 1886, when the new post offices started to be named after the streets that they were located on. So in 1886, Toronto North became the Carlton Street Post Office, Toronto West became the Bathurst Street Office, and Toronto East became the Queen Street East Office. A map of what is now downtown Toronto, but back in the 1880s, it was almost all of Toronto. The main post office was pretty much bang center. There was the Toronto East, called Queen Street East, Toronto North, which is only about 2.5 kilometers north, and Toronto West, and that's a very easy walking distance, 15-minute walk. So it's not as if they're spread it over miles and miles and miles. It was still fairly tight, but each served a specific business community. So the Toronto North branch was at 443 Yonge Street. So just I say a little north of the main branch. And there's what 443 Yonge Street looks like today. It's a Shoppers Drug Mart, and Shoppers Drug Mart still has a post office in it. One of those little branch offices with a number, but nonetheless, it's still there. By the way, there's a lot of these little illustrations, and I snitched them off Google. You do the Google map search, and you get your street view, and you can clip and paste to your heart's content. Makes a nice addition to illustrate a collection. So the Toronto North began its life with a duplex cancellation with what they call the intaglio N, the letter N reversed through the killer. All of these intaglio cancellations, by the way, are relatively scarce and therefore relatively pricey if you're out looking for them. But they're quite attractive, and sometimes people just miss them. They're not looking hard enough. They don't notice the break in the presentation here. It's sometimes, depending on what the stamp is, they're very hard to notice. But this was a nursery that was in what is now the downtown core. They could never afford to have a nursery down there now at the price of that land. Toronto North carried on with a revision to that intaglio. They kept a different type of a killer, and this is what they call it. Still a split circle. The arcs are pretty short, but they put the Toronto North into the duplex. And again, a very attractive and a clean hand stamp, and very popular to collect, and relatively difficult to find. Toronto West branch over at Queen and Bathurst, and guess what? It's still a post office. There's the post office sign, and here's the Shoppers Drug Mart that it's stashed in. Excuse me, the Follis Johnson, who was the postmaster, was also quite a character. He not only was the postmaster, but he went out and solicited the contract to go around the city emptying the letterboxes to the street mailboxes to take the mail into the central post office. So he was a pretty busy guy. I guess he subcontracted that to employees. And again, the Toronto West branch featured the intaglio W. And again, it's tough to find, but they're out there. There's still lots of them, I believe, because that was a very busy office at the time. And Toronto West also had the duplex with Toronto West spelled out. And this one just happens to be it's a ratty cover, but it's a very early use of the postmark there. So if you're a postal historian, sometimes you're willing to give up the beauty of the cover for historical significance of the date. There's a registered letter out of the Toronto West branch, and this shows one of the very interesting features of the branch offices. They were not geared to handle overseas mail directly. So this letter would have been registered at the Toronto branch, Toronto West, and then sent into the Toronto branch, where they applied this registration hand stamp, a registered octagonal, and they took care of the mail going overseas. It would have been bagged and sent down to Union Station, and thence on to the points east for the ships, either in Quebec or Halifax or New York. Another registered letter out of the Toronto West branch, and just illustrating a different type of transit mark. Rather than putting the registered on the front, they show that it transited through the Toronto Post Office, through the registration depot, and again followed the same process as the letter with the octagon. And as you can see, this letter also has the Toronto West duplex kind of blown up here a little bit. Darren, question? Hey, Joan, how do I get to answer Darren's question? Darren, did you have a question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks, Garfield. In the bottom left-hand corner, you have some type of digital enhancement of the. I would just like you to describe, perhaps to the audience, how you went about that. It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but I think it would be worth knowing.
I had the advantage of using the VSC 6000 for that, but under normal circumstances, I would have used Retro Reveal, which is now available again. That's another discussion. But either the VSC or Retro Reveal allows you to do this kind of work. You can also play with it through Photoshop and fade out or filter out the red, leaving you the postal marking. So that was done on the VSC using an infrared filter.
Thanks.
Thank you. The Toronto East branch is a real spooky operation. I don't know how it survived. Mail from anything out of this office is really scarce, and you'll notice that the front page doesn't even feature a Toronto East piece. There just isn't enough of it. And there is still a post office in that neck of the woods, but the Toronto East branch was over here where the parkland is. But there is the Toronto East with the intaglio marking. And again, Darren, this is a retro reveal of this particular postcard, so you can filter out the background. And for those who don't know how to use retro reveal, it's just changed its name, and we can discuss that one later on, or I'll send a note to Joan and she can pass it on to the group in a general broadcast mail. Whoops. There's a rather attractive piece out of the Toronto East branch. And it's kind of funny because the Massey manufacturing plant was about 500 meters from the Toronto West branch. So I'm guessing somebody just mailed it on the way home. Again, a very attractive advertising piece. And this one also has a little kicker that they got the 8 upside down in the date stamp. Nothing significant. It doesn't enhance the value, but it's just a little curiosity. You find these every now and then. So those were the 3 branch offices, which you can see now got switched over to 24 different street offices. And you can see the range of dates: 1884, 86, 92, 96. So they were kind of phased in over the next 15 years. I drew up this little chart because some people think that all of the postal markings should be priced about the same, but this shows the number of days that the street offices were open. So from the moment they opened until the death of Queen Victoria. So you can see a few of the offices were open, 5,000 days, and others were 700 days, 600 days. So that'll give you an idea of the relative scarcity of the mail going through them. One of the anomalies here is Lee Avenue. It was open for 1,600 days. I have only seen one piece of mail, and that's only seen. I do not own one. One piece of mail that went through that office in that 1,600 days. It is so scarce that it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know why there's no mail. So the West Toronto Junction was one of the early offices to open, and that opened in June of 1884. So there still had the branch offices there. It was well out in the West End. There was a railway station there, but it was opened up in the home of the postmaster. And this is the earliest recorded strike of a postmark from the West Toronto Junction. And of course, it's a standard target killer to get rid of the stamp. the lovely example of the printed matter rate. The printed matter rate was really cheap. Again, I don't know how they ever did it, but it was 1 cent per 4 ounces. Most packages didn't contain 4 ounces. This one only contained a price list. So printed matter was a fairly commonplace kind of mail. And if you're looking at postal history, this guy, John Waddell in Orono, which is quite a ways east of Toronto, up Highway 115, but he was in just with every business you can ever conceive. I mean, this is the Wire Mattress Company, but he was also he was an undertaker, so he gets mail from the casket companies. And it's, I think, an interesting social collection could be made of John Waddell's mail. And he must have been a bit of a postal nut because he kept all of his mail. Whoops. Here's our Massey Manufacturing Company again, back in their home turf over at Bathurst Street. And you'll see that there's a lot of mail going out of Massey to the John Bear Esquire. John Bear ran a hardware emporium up in the area of Armadale, which is now Markham. And John Bear also happened to be the postmaster. So he collected an enormous pile of mail. So you will see in the Small Queen period vast quantities of postal history addressed to John Bear. I think that he threw out nothing in his lifetime. Further mail from Bathurst Street. Now this one sneaks in just a little bit after the death of Queen Victoria. She died in January of 1901. And here's March the 18th, which is the latest date of use of this particular hand stamp. So it was retired the next day. Carlton Street, interesting little post office. And again, Carlton Street used a duplex hand stamp. The Carlton Street area was primarily residential, but also very close to the University of Toronto. So you're going to see a fair bit of mail from the university or to the university going through that particular post office. But there's an awful lot of postcards and handwritten correspondence going through there. That just got out of sequence somehow, but I guess no harm, no foul. Another Carlton Street duplex cancellation. Again, very neatly canceled. I think that the local postmasters were far more careful in applying the date stamps than where the postmasters in the large centers. Again, remember that these guys all had small businesses to run, and I just think they took a whole lot more care in processing their mail. It's gives us some really quite nice cancellations and postal markings. Again, another example of handwritten correspondence out to the nurseries, Stone and Wellington. Nothing particularly spectacular about it, but it's again a lovely example of a very clean hand stamp. The Queen Street East Post Office is now a sort of a garden, but this is the neck of the woods that it was situated in, and you can still see some of the buildings. I mean, this postcard I think was done about 1920. And this building here is this one, and this building can still be identified as being this one with some of the upper structure work removed, and of course bicycles instead of buggies. Very clean mail through Queen Street East. He almost missed when he was canceling the letter. Now, this guy, of course, was contrary to regulation because postmasters were instructed not to use date stamps to cancel the mail. The instruction was to apply the date stamp somewhere down here where it wouldn't interfere with the stamp, and to use another obliterator. Suffice to say that many postmasters shortened that instruction, and I think that we're eternally happy that they did, because we've got dates on stamps, and a lot of people who do collect stamps collect dated stamps. So they're all contrary to regulation, but that's all okay too. The Gerard Street Post Office is just down the street from what used to be the Carlton Street. Carlton's office was up in this neck of the woods, so it's just moved down the street about 3 blocks. And again, it's in a drugstore, and there's it was in that drugstore right in here, and that's still a post office today. And again, mail out of the Gerard Street Post Office, beautifully canceled, very nice clean strikes, which is just a postal historian's delight when you get that. There's no challenging the validity of the dates. A lot of interesting mail for the social philatelists. And again, it's nice when you can confirm the date stamp with a manuscript date of the correspondence. That post office got renamed Elm Street, so now it's moved from Carlton Street down to Gerard Street, and now down to Elm Street is under the line, but the post office was right at the end of Elm Street, across the street from the street. And again, it's in a drugstore. Mr. Montgomery continued as the postmaster, so I guess he was an employee of Mr. Boyle in the drugstore. And there's a lot of mail through Elm Street. Elm was one of the very busy post offices, and there's just an extraordinary amount of mail. If you're going to see any of the street post offices in a dealer's box, you'll probably find Elm Street before you find anything else. There is lots of it, and you can get a complete range of postal history. And this is an example of the UPU 2-cent postcard, which is valid for virtually anywhere in the world. This is the 1-cent postcard, which is designed for domestic use only. And so paid the 1-cent rate to anywhere in Canada. And again, a wonderfully clear date stamp that was used. And unfortunately, somebody used Scotch tape to fix that cover. It's this postcard into his album at one stage of the game. And for people who are students of calligraphy and handwriting, it's just wonderful to see some of the marvelous work that the people did in those days. They actually did teach handwriting at schools at one time. Here's a lovely example of an overall advertising piece out of Elm Street. And there's a whole lot of mail out of the Central Press, and a whole lot of mail going to the Hamilton Spectator. But this was an overall printing, which right around the entire envelope. Very attractive stuff, and that was kind of a leading edge for the printers of the day. Printing envelopes is still a pretty tough job. I know most printing houses don't like to do them because they're hard to handle, and I would suggest that this one was probably hand fed into the press because there's no space on the edge for a gripper. But they've managed to print that without having the outline of the flap come through the printing, where you get the multiple levels. You can see a trace of it here, but not much. Nice job. Elm Street was also the home of some very interesting companies. Here you've got the Eureka Mineral Wool and Asbestos Company. And so asbestos was a very popular product in the 1890s and 1900s. And of course, nowadays you couldn't sell this stuff anywhere. Again, as I was a very busy neck of the woods, lots of societies, lots of groups of various and sundry types were within walking distance of that post office. It wasn't even very far from the south end of the University of Toronto campus. So we do find a lot of society mail, notices of meetings and so on. And again, I keep on pointing out that the postal markings are so clear in most cases that it becomes an historian's delight. The Dundas Street Post Office was a fairly small little office in the extreme west end of the city at the time. And it was stuck into a little grocery store, which is it's still a grocery store, but it's a sort of a corner mom and pop shop now. And funnily enough, the last time I presented this presentation, I had a cover in here that the lady who was the chair of Toronto's first post office was at the meeting, and she called me afterwards and said, the return address is my home. So she now has that cover framed and in the front hall of her home, and I had to find a new Toronto or Dundas Street item to replace it. But it was kind of nice to find that coincidence, because she just lived down here on about a block south of the post office. I love this one. This proves that people would go a long ways to save the money of sending a letter to England. It was 5 cents to send a letter, but only 2 cents to send a postcard. And the domestic postcard, in fact, was larger than the UPU postcard. So here somebody's had a lot to say. They've got a 1 cent postcard, uprated it by 1 cent, and they can print everything and save the 3 cents on the correspondence. I just think that's a lot of fun that they've done that. By the way, if you're collecting postcards, one of the tragic things is that they've often got holes in them because people put their incoming mail on spikes. Nothing you can do about it. It's there forever. Here's a couple of the different date hubs that they used at Dundas Street. You can see that this upper portion has been completely changed, and they've got the date and the date and the time, date, and month. Here they got the date and the month. Spadina Avenue. This is also a fascinating one, and the Spadina Avenue post office was right here on the corner. That is no longer a post office. I'm not sure what it is, but I can tell you what it isn't. So this is the corner of Queen and Spadina, looking south on Spadina Avenue. And this post office, by the way, the office was there till 1976. There, the aforementioned holes are punched to save the letter. And Spadina was one of the offices that had the numbered grill. You'll notice that if you're collecting Toronto, you've got numbers 1 through 5. Number 1 was the main post office. 2 was Bathurst Street. 3 was Spadina. 4 was Yorkville, and the number 5 was Riverdale Branch. Fairly common things. They're not too hard to find, and there are a lot of nice strikes of them out there. Spadina also used an 11-bar killer, and that was a very effective part of a duplex. And this is a gorgeous use of the proper use of the hand stamp, the dated portion off the stamp, and the killer doing its job. We got the introduction of the squared circle postmarks. I think that the reason that these aren't always as clear as they should be was that there was such a big flat surface. You had to hit the strike at exactly right angles to the paper, or you didn't get a full marking. And I think that getting a dead on right angle thing is just, it's not a comfortable kind of a process. But they did also use a circular date stamp for the entire duration of the Spadina Avenue office. There was always a circular date stamp there in use. Whoops. There is a registered piece of mail out of Spadina Avenue. And again, the purpose here, this is past period because we're into the Edwards now. And of course, Queen Victoria's long dead. But it shows that the branch office was still open, and they still had to transit the mail through the Toronto office because it was registered. So that was that continued to be the process. All the small offices sent everything to Toronto for either overseas or for registration. There's another example of somebody just trying to fill up the postcard completely. They could have said more by getting the bigger postcard and uprating it by a cent, but this is the correct use of the UPU card, sending a letter back to England. Bleecker Street is a fascinating one. This is probably a kind of a complex thing. The only remnant I could find of the office from the old days was the street sign at the corner, and somebody hit it with a truck and bent it. But that says 199, and the office was at 199 Wellesley Street. So it was that building right on the corner, which is no longer a commercial building of any type. But Bleecker Street was properly spelled with a C, but when they opened the office, they made a mistake on the canceling device and they left the C out. So you've got Bleecker Street without a C and Bleecker Street with a C. They further confused the issue by using a mute hand stamp with a W in it. And then that was because this other sign is Wellesley Street and Bleecker Street. So the W is probably the Wellesley Street entrance to the post office. And there is an example of the W. And for quite a while, people were thinking that the W meant it was the Toronto West office, and Bleecker was identified as the Toronto West office, but Toronto West was actually the Bathurst Street office. So you got and these were used in the parcel department. And Bleecker Street was an office that did a lot of parcels because there are a lot of publishing houses in the area. So there's an enormous amount of book post with the W rubber hand stamp. This is one of my favorite pieces out of Bleecker Street, and everything was changed after to the C, but after the post office was changed to a C, they came out with a squared circle hand stamp, and guess what? There's no C in there at all. And Dr. Alfred Whitehead discovered this, and this is his discovery piece, which he published in BNA Topics. And I don't have the date offhand when he published it, but the post office realized that they had made a mistake in issuing the Bleecker Street without the C, and they recut the squared circle hammer to make it a C. So this one was used from January 30th, 1895 till this one came in on March the 4th, 1895. There are 11 strikes of this hammer known to exist on cover, and this is one of them. And this, I say, is the discovery piece. And I use that in my exhibit of the half-cent small queen, which, if I might brag, just got a large gold at Capex. Peter Street is another very interesting office on Queen Street, again, right in the heart of downtown. And that site today is, according to Google, is for lease. So if you want to get a post office downtown, there you are. There's an opportunity to get some real estate. And again, a nice clean strike of the Peter Street marking with a bad strike of the obliterator. But the other nice thing is it's got the postal or letter carrier's marking. So we know it was received on July the 6th, and it was out on the street for delivery on July the 7th. Whoops. And here we have Peter Street registered mail to the US. And this has got all kinds of markings, which is makes it kind of fun. The oval R for registration, which is in very common use across the country. The Peter Street duplex. Unfortunately, they got one real good strike with the time and date cleared, and the fact that it went into Toronto. So it got received at Peter Street in the afternoon of November the 14th. It was in the Toronto Post Office on November the 15th and registered in the Toronto Post Office. Off to Montreal on the 15th, and there's a Montreal receiver back here. There it is, the Montreal receiver on the 15th. And then in Boston on November the 17th, and in Gloucester on the 17th. So not bad mail service from Sunday evening to get the letter delivered in Boston in 3 days. The Bloor Street Post Office. This is a postcard of the, I guess it was again back in the 1920s. And I believe the post office might have been in one of these stores in here. It's now a pizza place. Seems to have lost some of its appeal there. But the Bloor Street office was not a big office, but again, they had an interesting variety of mail going through there. Here's our infamous Hamilton Spectator, and I expect that this might have been advertising copy from the Dodds kidney pills people. And sometimes they use 3-cent stamps, sometimes they use combinations, but they did present a lot of very pretty covers for us collectors in the 20th century. Rusholme Road, again, a small office just down the street from the Bloor office, probably about 10 blocks, and stuck in a drugstore, and that is the actual store today. I'm not sure what they're selling in there right now, but it may be a cannabis shop. But this is an early use of the Rusholme Road for a registered letter, and this is a nice example of a domestic registered letter, 3 cents postage and 5 cents registration. The well-known R, and again, a very nice clear Rusholme Road hand stamp. Postcards, just all over the place. And this was kind of interesting in view of the COVID. I just picked it up during the COVID period. And here's a guy that's sending a postcard to Heinzman's, his employer, saying, we got scarlet fever in the house and we're under quarantine for 30 days, 35 days. So I won't be into work at the first of the year. Kind of an interesting piece of social history as well as postal history. Parliament Street, a small office in the East End. It's now a corner convenience store. And that was a drugstore back in 1891. And again, postcards. And by the way, if you're collecting postmarks, postcards are absolutely wonderful because you do get better strikes than you get on letters. This is a nice early use, November of 1891. I say it was opened in August of 1891, so a couple months after the opening date. Interesting examples of some of the people who mailed letters there. The Eckert Casket Company, which must have been a huge going concern in those days. I can't imagine that we ever had a casket factory that big in Toronto. And pressure boilers, they called inspirators at the time. And this is a registered letter out of Parliament Street. This is an interesting postcard, in as much as the postcard got reused or forwarded, and it was contrary to regulations. You were not allowed to use a postcard a second time, but the postcard was delivered to Wood Street and then sent on again in a few days with a new set of postage being paid, but again, contrary to regulations. The Strawn Avenue Post Office was a huge, busy office, and but you can see it also had some interesting neighbors, the lunatic asylum and the prison. But it also had companies like Inglis, who was a huge appliance manufacturer, the Massey Tractor Company, and even of late, up until about 10 years ago, Ashton Potter Printing Company was up in this neck of the woods as well. These are 3 interesting covers from Massey Harris. Massey Harris was, for people who are unaware, the world's leading tractor and farm implement company, a huge organization, and the Masseys were prominent through Ontario and especially in Toronto as philanthropists and businessmen. The wonderful Massey Hall is a part of the Massey heritage. And of course, one of the brothers was Raymond Massey, the renowned actor. So there's a lot of interesting Massey Harris stuff around, and people are keenly interested. There are a lot of folks who collect nothing but Massey Harris. Makes a wonderful collection on the side. And again, just to give you an idea of some of the companies that went through, there's the Massey's Printing Company, Inglis, the engine boiler works. I say now they make washing machines and all that nonsense. Just a gorgeous strike of the squared circle hand stamp, and then the American Rattan Company with a very nice use of the circular date stamp. The York Street office is right in the heart of downtown Toronto, and in fact, the post office was in the lobby of the hotel, and this is the Rawson House Hotel, and there's the lobby of the hotel. The hotel is now long gone. It's a modern structure, but looks like it was a pretty fancy place. It would have been a nice place to have a post office. And there's the Rawson House featured on a postcard. I'm sorry. Oh, Gene?
Yes, yes. A few slides past, you had an envelope that said private postcard. What does that mean?
Private post. I've forgotten where it is now.
The Massey. Just a few. There you go. Private postcard.
Okay, private postcards were allowed after 1895. And it meant that the first postcards were only government issued, and you couldn't have any advertising on the front of them. Companies tried to sneak some advertising on the front, and then ultimately the post office said, okay, fine and dandy, you can put anything on it, but you've got to mark it as being a private postcard. It's not available for commercial use. It's for your company only. So you'll see companies after 1895 created private postcards.
But that looks like it's an envelope, but it's actually
no, that is a postcard.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, and they had to fit all the postcard definitions, shape and size and weight and so on, and they had to leave a big enough space for the address. But they could put any advertising on there they wanted.
Great, thank you very much.
Some of them did get pretty fancy too, by the way. And so here's some of the stuff that went through York Street. This is just as far as I'm concerned, a lovely cover. The Becks always had a great advertisement up in the corner. Lovely artwork. This is a 2-cent drop letter rate, so it was mailed in Toronto for delivery in Toronto because it's going onto King Street. And this happens to be the earliest known use of this hand stamp, which is a bit of a bonus. And again, York Street had a fair volume of bulk mail went through, so they used roller cancels as well. Those are just like a caster with the cancellation cut into it. There's no date involved with it because it's all advertising mail, circulars, and so on. So there's no first class mail was included in bulk mail. At Toronto Junction, this is what happened to the old West Toronto or Toronto West office that I mentioned way back in the presentation. And this is Dundas Street and Keele Street, and you can see this building in the postcard is still very much here. The one with the tower is now fallen, and this building put up in 1888 still stands and holds an A&W root beer. But the post office was right in here somewhere. Again, I can't get an exact fix on it, but it was in that section of the town. And the railway station was up behind this building. And again, it's just standard mail went through there. This is a nice example of what they call the adjacent post office. Toronto Junction was considered to be outside of Toronto, but rather than necessarily charging 3 cents, it was accredited a 2 cent adjacent post office rate. It was a sort of a conciliatory rate because people just felt it was ridiculous to pay the same rate to Toronto as they were paying to send a letter to Vancouver. And there's a 1 ounce letter to the US for 3 cents. Cleveland Bicycle Company and the Bank of Commerce. And this is of course nice because it's here they couldn't read Athens properly, return for better direction, rewritten Athens and back into the mail again. This is one of my favorites, the Celery King Company. My God, a Celery King, as you can see, had a positive cure for just about anything that you might want to think could ever happen to you. I don't know how they ever got away with selling snake oil and so on like that, but that seems to have been one of the things that went on in the turn of the last century. St. Joseph Street is a small downtown office, which was renamed Carlton Street. And it was opened in 1893, and it was in this nice little corner building. Still a gorgeous building today. And St. Joseph Street had nothing spectacular going for it, except that I think that the postmaster was very considerate with his cancellations. And you look at those stamps on the left; they've done just an absolutely gorgeous job of making sure that they're all hit beautifully with the date stamp, contrary to regulation, but creating some gorgeous stuff for us collectors. Again, another range of material, right out in Maybe. I believe they were in the real estate business. I have no idea what Hopkins did. And Edward Rawlings was an insurance company. They sold travel insurance, and the head office was in Montreal. And Rawlings kept all of his mail too, so you'll see a lot of mail to Rawlings. The North Toronto office was just about 2 blocks south of where the Green Foundation is today. And this building just came down last week. So it's now a vacant lot, and there's going to be a high-rise condominium going there, I believe. And again, mail to Mr. Rawlings out of the North Toronto office. And by the way, there's the North Toronto and there's the Toronto North. So don't confuse the two of them. Toronto North was a branch office, whereas North Toronto was a street office. And this is the earliest recorded use of a hand stamp out of the Toronto North office. And again, in Montreal, they used carrier marks as well. And the reason they use carrier marks is that it was almost a mortal sin to delay the mail. So carriers were putting their delivery mark on it when they got it and went out on their route. And they could say, hey, it's not my fault it was late. So just again, standard mail going through the Toronto North branch. Nothing dreadfully exciting, but weak postal markings, but nonetheless, out it goes. Here's the Broadview office, and on this postcard is very nice because there's the sign saying post office on the lamppost. So there's the same lamppost, but there's no post office there anymore. And this is in a drugstore, as were many of the offices. And again, we had brewers up there, advertising agencies, and just standard, very nice looking mail. There's your private postcard again for the Reinhardt Company. Clinton Street. Again, Clinton Street is another small office in the heart of downtown. It's now pretty much a residential area, but it was, the post office was in a stationery store, which was this store right in here. And early material out of this office is kind of scarce. But there is a nice early use, on July the 24th, 1894. Whoops. And there's a regular postcard out of Clinton Street. They say they were used all over the place. Nice name for the veterinarian, Dr. Mole. Pape Avenue is a very small office, and material out of this office is very tough to find, and therefore finding examples of all the postal markings is really tough. But I got lucky on this one because the postmaster, God bless him, used a circular date stamp, but he used a roller cancel, a parcel cancel to get rid of the stamp as well. So that was really nice of him to give me 2 postal markings on the same envelope. And this just shows that the small offices also handled other functions of the post office, and this is a receipt for a postal money order. All offices were entitled to sell money orders and receive deposits on behalf of the post office. Lee Avenue, this is the rare one. I've only seen one piece out of the Lee Avenue office. It was a small grocery store, and as you can see, this is a page out of the directory. They mentioned that between 1926 and 2180 on Queen Street East, they had these small businesses, mainly vacant lots though. But there's the post office shown as in Mr. Smith's grocery store with no street number on it. This is the only 19th century piece of mail that I have ever seen out of that office. And it belongs to my good friend Kim O'Salonen, also a member of the expert committee at the Green Foundation. But he's not a good enough friend to sell it to me. I do have one item out of the Lee Avenue office, and this is a registered letter on May the 10th. Again, I apologize that it's outside of my defined period of time, but when it's the only one you got, that's all you've got to show. And there's the Carlton Street Post Office, which was one of the last offices to open as a street post office on April the 1st, 1899. And it was previously the St. Joseph Street office, so it's still in the same little house that I showed you before. And it's still a beautiful building today. And there's a continuation of the mail going out of that office. This is an early use dated June the 1st, 1899. Again, it's just a continuation of the mail that was going through the other office. This one I include because it's nothing spectacular up here, but John Ross Robertson was the editor of the Toronto Star and a great philanthropist in Toronto, and it's just nice to get a piece of personal mail from John Ross Robertson, and if you're an autograph seeker, there it is. So that kind of wraps all of the Toronto street offices, and the funny thing was that I had finished off part of this project a while back, and I thought, well, it was time to put together an exhibit. So I did, and I took the exhibit nationally and ended up getting a gold medal. And I thought, I'm pretty proud of myself on this thing. And then something happened that shattered me. I found a cover or a postcard that said Toronto Union Railway Station. I said, damn, I've got a gold medal for an exhibit, and I've missed the post office. So, you really can't get away with that. That's not fair. So I started researching, and there wasn't a post office at Toronto Union Railway Station. There's no record of a post office being there before 1927. So where did this come from? Why is there a Toronto Union Railway Station marking? So I embarked on doing some looking, and I discovered another. Here we got a big fat circular date stamp. Now I've got a duplex cancellation dated 1882. And I think, gosh, there's got to be something going on down there. Then I got the two very expensive acquisitions because I'm finding out that this darn material is as scarce as hen's teeth. But they're both Union Station duplexes. And then I found this in a box of junk that I had. I hadn't really checked that out. That was a kind of a ratty looking cover. Lo and behold, Union Station again. Well, what the heck's going on here? Now we've got roller cancellations on newspaper receipts. And again, they're all received at Toronto Union Station. And Toronto Station has rubber hand stamps in red and purple. But that post office, which is it's now the home of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors, but Station A, Terminal A, was not opened until August the 6th, 1927. So here's what I learned from these markings. There was a railway station near Bay and Front Street for the, as you can see, the Ontario, Simcoe, and Huron Railway. And that this was a locomotive that was built downtown, by the way, and carried by a temporary rail system to connect to the railway system. And this railway ran between Toronto and Bradford, and it finally collapsed. It was a financial disaster and didn't do much. In the meantime, we got the Grand Trunk Railway, which in 1855 was completed between Toronto and London, Ontario. And in 1858, it was completed between Toronto and Montreal. So now you've got a railway that runs clear from Montreal right through to London, Ontario. And they needed a better station than they had for the old railway. So they built the first Union Station, which is called New Station. And this is the only known photograph of New Station, but obviously impressive. They got 2 or 3 tracks running through there, and it was located at the present Front and York Street. We also got a notice that I found that in 1859 they introduced street letterboxes in Toronto, and you notice that number 6 is at the Union Railroad Station, but I suspect it was outside the station rather than on the platform. But we notice there's something going on there. And in 1869, there's a contract between the Grand Trunk Railway and the post office to carry mail. And paragraph 7 of the contract says a convenient room to be provided at the Montreal and Toronto stations for the accommodation of an officer of the post office to be stationed at each of these points. So now things are starting to come to light. I think that rather than being part of the Toronto post office, this falls under the collection of railway post offices. And I suspect that a railway clerk was stuck at Montreal and in Toronto and in the room. And I suspect that the only reason he was there was because they were running mail down all through the course of the day, and mail could not be left unattended on the platform. And the train leaving Toronto for Montreal went at apparently 8 minutes after 7 every evening. And so a clerk had to be there to maintain the chain of custody of mail. And I think that is where that came from. The Postmaster General's report in 1862 shows that there's nobody on the payroll to handle that. And again, there was no railway clerk assigned to duty, but there was a clerk on every train that was handling the mail. So I assume that the station clerk was employed by the RPO, and mail accepted at the station for onward transmission was not just put on the train, it was sent up to the Toronto post office for processing and then sent back down in a sealed bag. But somewhere along the line, they gave the guy a hand stamp and said, you can receive mail and put it directly on the train. But there was a station that they built to replace that open platform, and that was designed after the Union Station in Chicago. And you'll notice that it was close enough to the water. There's where ships are coming up on one side to the wharf, and they're loading directly onto the trains. So that was kind of an interesting process, and this exit spilled it into the city. There's what a Grand Trunk mail train looked like. Just an engine, a tender, the mail car, and one passenger coach, and that was it. But they hustled the mail out of Toronto every night and got it into Montreal for the early morning delivery. So bottom line is, I'm still saying nothing here can be proven. But mail at the station was sent to the post office for processing. Nothing was received and placed directly on the train. And any mail going out of Toronto for rail transport was sent out in closed bags. But somewhere in the 1870s, an RPO clerk at the station was authorized to receive late mail on the platform. To date, I have found, and there's a newspaper clipping from the Globe and Mail in 1883. The business community had gone to the post office, and they were quite upset that if a business was closing at 6 p.m., they weren't in time to meet the closing of the bag at the post office. So they wanted to be able to mail on the station platform. And I also suspect that the newspapers wanted to have late delivery, so that's why they had the roller cancels at the platform, and that was for mail probably going to Montreal and points east. The current status of the study of this thing is that today there's only 25 pieces of mail bearing the Union Station hand stamp. I've got 11 of them. There are 3 other Toronto specialists that have loaned me copies of all of their material. I've scoured high and low trying to find Union Station postal markings, but say that they seem to be extremely scarce. And April 17th, 1899 is the last letter mail postmarked at a Union Station, or the latest one that I have ever seen. So it's still a mystery. This is still a real work in process. And I must admit that I'm having a field day with it. I've got a lot of people looking for stuff for me. And I appeal to everybody that I speak to, if you've got any postmarks from Union Station, I'd love to receive a scan of them. It would just help so much in this study. We got to make sense of this somehow or another, but I just don't know where the sense is. So thank you for watching and listening to me. And I said I'd make it an hour, and my stopwatch says 1 hour, 3 minutes and 36 seconds. So not bad. We're pretty good there. And if you need to chase me down, there's my email address. Feel free to send me questions, or I love to get feedback on these presentations. I like to know what people think, but I also like to hear what other good stories you've got that I can incorporate into my research. Richard.
Yep, hold on. Okay, Richard, you could talk.
Yes, Richard.
Are you aware of the Union Station listings in the RPO catalog?
Yeah, there's 3 hand stamps that are listed there. You're talking about the Ludlow catalog?
The more recent one, there's a whole boatload of them. There's best part of a dozen of them.
I wasn't aware there was a new catalog.
Yeah, the one I've got is wait a second here. It's probably 8, 9 years old.
Okay, what I'm going to have to do is, so when I go into the Green Foundation next week, I will have our librarian find it for me.
Yeah, this is done by Ross Gray.
Okay, yes, I'm aware of that catalog.
Okay.
Yeah, that one shows some proofs of the three hand stamps that were used there, but it doesn't tell me why. It doesn't tell me why or how, but it does confirm the fact that there were three hand stamps used at the Union Station. And so I now have examples of all three of them on postage, but I'm still trying to find a confirmation of who paid the clerk.
Yeah, there's
Was he
actually
paid by the,
five numbered ones that are Union Station Toronto, the numbered 1 through 5. Then there's a Union Railway Station Toronto.
now are they 20th century markings with those numbers?
Yes.
Okay, that's sort of why I've skipped looking at that, because I've kind of stopped my interest in the thing at 1901 with the death of Queen Victoria.
Actually, one of them is 1899, one is 1900. There's an 1882 Union Railway Station.
Yeah, I'll check out Ross Gray's catalog when I'm in the library on Monday. But thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
You're welcome.
So, Joan, do you want
Garfield,
to?
I'm bringing people over, and I think, Rob, do you have some questions for Garfield?
No, I didn't notice any that that were brought up during the presentation.
Okay, I got to note that two people have got their hands up, but I can't see who they are. Now I've got three.
We have a lot of people with their hands up, and I'm going to bring them over as panelists. If you want to stop your screen share, and
Got it. Okay,
we
great.
could ask
There we
directly.
go.
They could ask you directly.
Hi, Richard. Haven't seen you online since this morning.
Garfield, David Foote.
David, how are you, my friend?
Good to hear you speak, and nicely done. Some of the stamps, of course, are in various positions on the covers, and you're probably well aware that often was used to send messages, and certainly a couple of yours were upside down and at angles. Do you think they were relevant, or is this just commercial mail?
It's David. I think it's pretty much commercial mail, but when I see mail going from individuals to other individuals, God, I don't know what they're doing. I can suspect that some of them are sending little secret messages, I love you, or don't show up at my house or whatever. I've never understood all the implied codes of the positioning and posturing of the stamps.
Michael, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Garfield, again, a fantastic presentation and an awful lot of research in there and a lot of fun too. I like your idea of actually going and borrowing Google Images to show where things are. That I think that's something I'll add to my repertoire. But my question, question. You mentioned at some places some of the markings were off center, weren't quite complete, and that sort of thing. Who was using a hammer and who were using hand stamps? Because I could see if you're using a hammer, then it takes a certain amount of practice, I would think, to position the envelope right, to get the right angle, and then to whack it. And if you're in a small pharmacy or a small store or something, you're making an awful lot of noise, and you got to have the counter space to do it. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with who was producing nice cancellations as compared to others.
Yeah, Michelle, I kind of expect, and I can't prove this anyway at all, but I suspect that most of the small offices did not have hammers per se, but had, in fact, hand stamps. Uh, I think that the hammers were essentially production items for large post offices. They're processing huge amounts of mail. Um, these small corner mom and pop kind of things. I think they used just a hand stamp and took a little bit more care and caution in applying the stamps. I'd love to get some payroll records and so on and find out how these post offices handled things. For example, Elm Street processed a huge amount of mail, and Bleecker Street had a huge amount of mail. Enough that they had a parcel department. How many people worked in that little shop? If you go into the Shoppers Drug Marts, say they might have, a clerk that's in the Kleenex department that runs back to run the post office as well. But they're not handling a huge volume of mail. But with the amount that went through Elm Street, I'm guessing a couple thousand pieces of mail a day. They must have more than one person. So I'm trying to find this out, and I say these records, because they're all privatized, I don't think the records are certainly not in the Postmaster General reports, and they just don't seem to be recorded anywhere I found so far.
Thank you.
How's that for a non-answer to a good question?
You're running for politics or not?
Never, not a chance.
Oh, okay. Stick to stamp collecting.
I got too much pride.
I like how you handled that explanation of why your exhibit still should get a gold, even though it may have been missing a post office. I thought was
Well, it
quite
turns out that it wasn't missing because there wasn't a post office, so I did have them all.
great. Richard, do you have a question?
Yes, Garfield, what is the attraction of pharmacies for post offices?
I suspect that they had the space and probably not a great deal of traffic at the time. I don't think pharmacies in the late 1800s were the same as the pharmacies of today. You didn't go in there to buy everything from milk to greeting cards and so on. You went in to buy pharmaceutical products. So I think this was a way for the pharmacists to enhance the income of the store.
And Stanley Gibbons started off in his father's pharmacy, if I recall the story correctly.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, but it seems logical. And I guess it was probably pretty expensive to set up a separate business too for a post office. And I'm not sure they expected to get the volume of mail through these small street post offices that they end up getting, because there's still a huge volume going through the main post office in Toronto. And again, I'm tabulating the number of employees each year, and the growth was fairly good. I mean, in about 1882 or 83, I think they had about 38 clerks at the Toronto post office. So there's no reason to think that it wasn't continuing to expand. But I suspect that in the pharmacies, they might have had a sweeper as well, and it was easy enough to have the sweeper carry the mail around too. Just sort of a general laborer.
I would think part of it too was the professionalism of the pharmacists. And also you'd have to check if if they had to belong to a professional organization at the time, and that might have played into it too.
Well, I think you'll find, Michelle, that there's also shall we say, a bit of an incestuous relationship amongst the postmasters. There's a lot of family members employed, and it seems that through the history of the post office in Upper Canada, we find that a lot of family members have postmasters positions. And they weren't just postmasters in Toronto or York, they were in a lot of the little outlying communities as well. So I think there was a lot of political favor was curried in those days as well.
In the case of the Stanley Gibbons, his father was actually a farm assistant. Stanley started off his business in a corner of the store.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Garfield,
Yes,
yeah, do you know of a similar study like yours for Montreal?
no, I don't, Richard. I have no idea if anybody else is crazy enough to do this.
Just curious.
I
Richard
imagine.
Moss, did we answer your question?
No, you haven't, Joan. Good evening, Joan, and good evening, Garfield. I was fascinated by all these street name post offices that you've got in Toronto, and it reminds me of a little display I've been putting together recently about a company. And amongst all the stuff that I found was a lot of stuff from the 1970s, where in New Zealand, during that particular period, they put down the name of the street where the post office was, but not the town. So you had the situation where it would say Manners Street, New Zealand, which was actually in Wellington, but the crowning glory was High Street NZ, which turned out to be at Christchurch. Is there any evidence of anything like that ever going on in Canada or even in the United States?
I don't know. This is the first I've heard of that. You know, I've seen a lot of mail that was very loosely addressed, and you know, early in the early running in Toronto before 1868, you would just often see a letter addressed to Richard Moss City.
Oh no, this was the postmark. This is actually the postmark of the post office. That was the post office. The post office postmark was High Street NZ, as opposed to High Street Christchurch or High Street Toronto. Is there any evidence of any sort of, as you're interested in post office marks, of street marks? I wondered if you'd ever seen anything like that used by post offices in Canada.
Actually, I know I haven't, and I think that everything that was on the Toronto street offices would say Elm Street, Toronto, or Bathurst Street, Toronto.
Yeah.
I think there was a couple of them that might have said Toronto.Canada, but you know, I guess they were typesetting cost money, and you needed a bigger hand stamp as well, so they probably stayed away from that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. You've got your hand up.
Frank?
Yeah,
Frank?
I wanted to make a comment on the small use of apothecary or druggist or whatever you want to call it, or corner grocery. That was common in the late 1800s through the early part of the 1900s, because they would be the ones that would be the servicer of just about everything in the neighborhood. Your small little business like that would pretty much handle everything. And so they would go to them, and the post office would say, hey, or they would go to the post office and usually would say, hey, I'll handle mail for you too. It was a way that they made a little extra money.
Yeah, I think that the business community in Toronto was really developing rapidly in the 1880s and 1890s, and you know, stores were becoming specialized, so they weren't all general stores anymore. You had bootmakers, and you had pharmacies, and you had grocers, and you know, gunsmiths and piano makers. They weren't all rolled into the one. The diversification was there, and until Eaton's and Simpsons came along in the early 20th century and began the department store business, but the post office never followed them. It always stayed with the small grocers and pharmacists and
Like I said,
stationary
it's
stores.
usually like I said, it usually was something that the person would do more like a service to the community. That also gave them extra people that would walk in their store. Of course, if they're walking in the store to deposit a piece of mail, they might buy something.
Oh, I think there's a very good argument for that, Richard. I think, Frank, I think there's a very good argument to be had for that. And I would say that that's why the pharmacist probably went after the mail contract. I think that the pharmacist probably sought out the contract rather than the contract seeking out the pharmacist.
I think that was usually the way it was here in the United States. Small businesses like that would go after the contracts so that they would get some additional revenue and additional people coming through their business.
Yeah, and it makes a whole lot of sense. I think, you know, there's a lot of merit in that argument.
And now we've got basically the same thing when you got the little small drugstores have that same service. We have it here. Walgreens will do that. CVS, they'll sell stamps.
Yeah, and again, you know, we've got everybody and his dog is up here selling stamps now. But I believe, but I cannot prove it. I don't know because I've never looked into it. But I suspect that Shoppers Drug Mart has a contract with the post office for X number of post offices, because they seem to be all over the place in Shoppers Drug Marts in Canada. But there's still a lot of little independent post offices, though they're in the back of gift stores. The one that's just 500 meters east of me is a card shop, and they've got a nice little post office in the back, and it's a mom and pop shop, and they do a real nice job.
One of our towns here in Florida, it's at the back of a beauty parlor. The beauty parlor is in the front part and the post office is in the back.
Hey, why not? Again, I don't think that they seek it any particular business. It's just whatever tends to work for the post office.
What's funny is it's right down the street from post office, a regular postal station.
Well,
But they
where would you
still have
rather,
that contract post office there. They've had it for 30, 40 years.
well, if you have your druthers, would you rather go to the post office and pick up a bag of gummy bears or just go to the post office?
Good point, Edward. Good point.
Louis, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Garfield.
Thank you, Louis.
I'm trying to confirm the postal rates that you mentioned earlier, circa 1892. What I jotted down was that a domestic postcard required only 1 cent.
That's right.
For use. An international one, 2 cents. And I thought I heard you say that a domestic letter required 5 cents of postage.
No, it was 3 cents for it was the domestic letter rate. Both, actually, 3 cents covered both Canada and the US. So,
and international then what beyond the US was 5 cents.
Was 5 cents.
Okay. Now, the second part of this is the uprated postcard. This is the first time I've heard of such a thing. And did it have to do only with the dimensions of the card, allowing for more text to be written and therefore commanding a higher price?
No, I think that the fact that there were different sizes was it was an accident. I can't see any reason that they would make them different sizes, but they did. And you know, I guess the difference is that and I'm putting on my printer's hat now and saying that the domestic postcard had no borders shown on the front. Therefore, they didn't have to trim to a border size, whereas the UPU card had a lovely green border all around. So they trimmed it down a little bit. So I think that the fact that it was a smaller card was purely an accident of happenstance, certainly not intended to save weight or anything like that.
Okay, so what commanded the extra postage on the uprated postcard?
Well, because it was going to England.
Okay.
Yeah, so they could have used the UPU card for 2 cents, or taken a 1 cent postcard and uprated it by a penny.
All right, thank you.
My pleasure.
Paul, you have a
Yeah, great show, Garfield. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Question, you mentioned Retro Reveal was now back in use, and
Yeah.
you could comment on that later.
Well, you know what? I would like, on that question, I would defer to Michelle Hood, who did a presentation on our West Toronto Thursday morning coffee session this morning on the new Retro Reveal. It's
Well, thanks, Garfield. What I'd be willing to do, it's about a 5-minute presentation. It's a PowerPoint. I can get that loaded and present it to the group if you want that, or if you don't, then I can just give you some words.
Is it the same address as it used to be?
No.
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 Okay.
Do you want the presentation?
Well, I'd like to see it, but obviously.
Okay.
show of hands.
Joan, if you'll allow it, I think it's certainly a worthwhile
I
thing for
think
this audience.
he could present, Garfield.
Okay,
And
give me.
Frank, do we want to get Frank's question first and then go?
Okay,
Michelle?
I'll prepare myself and I'll come on after Frank. Thanks.
I was just going to comment on the size of the UPU card. Those were UPU regulations. The US card is the same size.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it's required. The size of the card was required. The US regular card at that time was larger than the UPU card.
Oh, there you are. Well, thank you for that, because I had no idea. I just
Yeah, the anytime you're doing anything internationally, the UPU regulated the size and the rates and the colors and everything they had to be. That was part of their being part of the organization.
Thank you for that piece
So if
of
you
it.
found a UPU card in the same time period from anywhere in the world, it would all be that size.
Good information. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'm ready to go unless I break something here. Okay,
Go for it.
Screen share. Okay. So hopefully you see Retro Reveal no more.
Yep.
Okay, so we're on. That was the homepage for Retro Reveal if you ever used it, and unfortunately, Retro Reveal is now gone. What happened is that in 1st of August of 2018, Retro Reveal used to be run on the website of the University of Utah, and they then sold. Well, not sold, but transferred the domain and the program to Hal Erickson. Somebody mentioned at the meeting this morning that Mr. Erickson is well into his 80s now, and we can probably speculate that he doesn't have the time or the interest to continue with Retro Reveal. Sometime at the end of May,
Could we just back up and define, for those of us who may not be familiar with what the tool does, could you just give a little bit of a background of what it does?
Okay. Okay, we'll jump here. This is the new site, which is similar to Retro Reveal. Okay, and what you do is that you click on that button, and then you upload a stamp where you have something on the stamp. Here we've got a cancellation that is not as clear as you'd like, and you'd like to make it come out. You'd like to reveal it. And that's what Retro Reveal would do. You would submit your stamp, and then this new site operates similar to what Retro Reveal did. You would press the process button, and then what it would do, it would take your original stamp, which you see in the upper left corner, and then it would pull it apart in many different ways. Here, this new program, in a similar way, would pull the stamp apart in 55 different ways. And as you look through the images, now I compress the images here to fit them all on one screen, but you would see maybe 2 images at a time on your screen as you scroll down, looking for the image that pulled out what you were looking for. And you can see here that's pretty good. And trying to see what's back there. Okay, so I just messed this up here again.
Was there more on that?
Yeah, there was more.
There you go.
Okay. Stop screen share. Well, the more is the words, but we have to get back to it because you want the URL. Okay, we'll go back up here. So the program disappeared because Mr. Erickson did not pay to have the URL continue. So it disappeared at the end of May. People then started looking around what happened and why, and a write-in campaign started asking him to bring it back. Others actually tried to contact him to buy it from him. And then what finally happened is a philatelist actually created the program that I was just showing you a presentation of. And he writes that I put together a new site that offers many of the same features as Retro Reveal. It's a work in progress, so please let me know if you encounter any odd behavior and any hiccups. And here's the URL. So copy this down. It's postmark-reveal.com. Postmark-reveal.com. It's free, and he's paid for the URL to be listed up to the August of 2027. So it should be around for a while. It's free. He accepts donations. I did donate to his site. What I like about him as compared to Retro Reveal was static. It was actually developed for something else. It was developed so that you could take very faded documents and then look to see if you could pull up the handwriting or the calligraphy or the whatever was on the documents. But once it was made available free on the internet, philatelists flocked to it like flies to a very bright light. Currently you can upload any image up to 400 megabytes, and here's the types of images. It'll take JPEGs, PNG, and GIF. And for some reason, so now we're back to where I was in the presentation. That's what it looks like on the internet. So we saw this before. You upload your image, you pick your image, you upload it, then you say process. It does this. Your image is pictured upper left, and then the 55 different ways of pulling it apart are shown to it. Any of these that you want, you double click on them, and then they open up big on your computer, and then you save them, and then you do with them whatever you want afterwards. So that's it. Thank you very much for allowing me to show this and for your interest.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're most welcome.
I think it's one of those things that, thanks, Michelle, for doing that again. I think it's one of these programs that every one of us who's a collector and a postal historian should put some money into this thing and make sure that it's a tool that's going to be available for all of us. You saw early in my presentation where I extracted some of the postal markings that were faint, and gosh, it's a great utility. And the nice thing is that, I mean, I mentioned I use the VSC 6000, but at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm working on my stamps, I'm not going to put on my socks and underwear and head downtown to use the VSC. I'd rather just click on Retro Reveal and work in the pleasure of my own home. So I think we should all support this thing, this endeavor. It's a great endeavor and a very useful tool.
What I like about it too, in the sense, and I've mentioned this or alluded to it a second ago, is that it's being developed by another philatelist, another stamp collector who understands stamp collecting, not some archaeologist who's trying to look at papyrus to see what the hieroglyphics are. And he has the background and skills in computer programming, and with the funds that he might be raising, maybe even hire other people to do more things that we philatelists ask him to do.
Michelle, have you added that to our PSSC website?
Yes, the link is up on the PSSC website, and I'll be doing another presentation to the PSSC Philatelic Specialist Society Show and Tell next week.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
I see we have Frank Shear here. Now, Frank, you do railroads cancels, don't you?
Takes a second to come off mute. Yes. I was very interested in the part that Garfield was talking about for the Toronto, what I believe is probably a transfer office for the Canadian Railway Mail Service. But since the time since I listened to that part of the presentation and sitting here listening in the background to what everybody else was saying on other topics, I was looking through my files to see if I had anything from the 1890s. Garfield, the only thing that I can suggest that you might do is looking through the Canadian postal laws and regulations, because there might be a section in there that was describing the Railway Mail Service, the Canada Railway Mail Service organization, and the functions that a transfer office would play. Ordinarily, using the USA as a basis of experience and really not being very clear that it was always identical to what was going on in Canada. In the USA, a transfer clerk could dispatch mail in a pouch to an outgoing railway post office. And Toronto was certainly a hub. One of the most important lines in Canada was Montreal and Toronto, which the clerks called the M&T. And that probably handled as much mail as any of the other railway post office routes combined, at least during the 20th century. Again, I don't have a good basis of information. The earliest Canadian Railway Mail Service schedule that I have is from 1923, so well after the period of time that you're investigating. But it's about the right time and place for these transfer offices. The transfer clerk had the responsibility of, as you pointed out, Garfield, showing that mail was connected between trains, or that there was custody of pouches to make these connections, or between that and the town or city post office. But they, at least in the US, could make a dispatch to a railway post office. So I think probably your best bet is just looking at the postal laws and regulations for Canada and seeing if there's any further insights that you can gain about some of those Union Station, I think it was, marks.
Yeah, actually, the fun has been going through the Postmaster General's reports. Now they're pretty dry reading. They're like 6 aspirins and a warm beer. They'll put you right to sleep. But there's not much dialogue in there explaining how and why things were done. The PMG reports are kind of action after the action reports. This many pieces of mail were transmitted, and this was the price, and this is the payrolls and so on. So it's I say I'm having a rough time finding information on it. And of course, the postal guides didn't come in until the 30s, so we've got a gap there between the PMG reports and the general postal guides.
But
still trying to find the instructions to postmasters to see what they have to say.
Well, was there also a companion document called the Postal Laws and Regulations or something like that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. When you go to the library on Monday, ask about that, because if it's anything like the US, all of the procedures and authorizations, if you will, for what a postal clerk did and how the organization operated was buried in these postal laws. Again, I'm making a leap that it was probably a similar process for Canada or for other British commonwealths.
Yeah,
So-
actually, we did have guides to postmasters that were written by the Postmaster General. The Postmaster General in Canada, by the way, at the times that we're talking about, was a member of Parliament. It was actually a parliamentary position, and he issues instructions to the postmasters in an annual guide that upgraded the rates and routes and introduced the new post offices and all of that stuff. But I have not found any mention of Union Station because, as I say, it was not a post office till 1927. It was a room at Union Station where the mail was held, and there had to be somebody there to be, as the custodian of that mail. And I suspect that he was paid by the Railway Post Office Department, which was a separate department from the regular post office.
I think that's a correct understanding. The Canada Railway Mail Service was established in the 1860s, I think, and maybe slightly before that. And very much like the U.S., the U.S. Railway Mail Service was a separate organization within the Post Office Department. So it's correct. Although I would think at the Postmaster General level, that all would have been reporting to him. But in any event, a great presentation. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you for your input.
If I see anything, I've got your email address. I may send you a note just to let you know that I tuned in. But if I see anything on that particular subject, I'm sure you're aware of the Railway Post Office Study Group for Canada.
Yes.
So anyway.
Yes, I've consulted a few of their members and picked a few of their brains as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. Well, thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
Thank you. I enjoyed doing it.
Thank you, Frank. I hated to impose, but I saw you there and
No, it's always good to jump on it. I was going to say something anyway. If I had found something in my records, I would have really jumped into the boat, but not seeing anything, I'm not sure that I really had anything for the 1880s, 1890s time frame to contribute. So I was just going to continue listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Lee Hung, you had a question earlier about whether Garfield covered the Y.
Yes, about the P, S, and Y depot in Toronto. Both those were all street cancels as well. The duplex from late 1898, 99.
Yeah, and that was a renaming, Lee, and I haven't included that only because they weren't named after the streets, but the P was the Parkdale station.
Y for York.
Y was Yorkville, and S was Spadina.
Yeah.
I didn't include those because technically Yorkville was not a street post office. It was Yorkville was a separate community in Toronto that was annexed into Toronto. And so I call that a slightly different class from a street post office. Similarly, Parkdale was its own entity for since about 1830. So I kind of left that one on its own, but it's part of the expansion story, but they were fully functioning post offices that were just assimilated into the Toronto system as Toronto kind of rolled out into the rest of the world. So they got sucked in as opposed to created specifically for the project.
As you're aware, Montreal has many street post offices as well. Two cities where there was a plethora of them.
And I think Halifax had a number as well.
Morris, Cotton.
Morris was the big one, of course.
Go ahead.
Michael, go ahead.
I was wondering, you've investigated this from the post office perspective, but Union Station belonged to who? Belonged to a railroad or the government?
It was the property of the Grand Trunk Railway.
So what about their records? Because if somebody was using a room in their station, you'd think there would be some records there about that.
They were just told in the 1869 legislation that they had to provide a room for the post office. End of discussion. So they said, fine, here's a room. Don't bother us.
Okay, all right.
I had a question about the employees in the smaller post offices based in stores. Who trained them? What were the guidelines about their training?
I think that they probably fell under the same rules and regulations as any other post office in Canada at the time. The postmaster of any post office was responsible for hiring and training employees. Now, in most post offices, those employees would have gone onto a government payroll. They would have been paid by the post office department. But I believe that in these smaller street post offices, the employees became employees of the pharmacy or the grocery store, and their work in the post office was incidental, and they were paid by the pharmacist or the grocer or whoever was the postmaster at the time. If you go back even to the first post office in Toronto, when Howard set up what is now still recognized as Toronto's first post office, it was his responsibility to build the post office and to staff it and to purchase all of the supplies consumed by the post office, which is why when he got fired in 1839 and Birdsey took over, he said, well, get the hell out of my building. You can't use this place anymore. It's not going to be a post office. So Birdsey had to build his own post office a couple of blocks away.
And train his own people. Now, I'm going to guess now with any Canadian post office or American post office, you walk in there, you are looking at a USPS employee, also a member of the union. Was it unionization or government tightening control that would have changed it from an employee of a pharmacy handling the mail, and now you can't do that?
To tell you the truth, I have no idea of that. I suspect the unionization didn't creep in until, well after the First World War. But again, in some of the small pharmacies and so on, I suspect people are still not members of any postal union. I still think that they're employed by the Shoppers Drug Mart and so on.
I think the post office, each post office as it grew, employees were then hired on. If you remember the first postcard, an early one from Toronto, was from the letter carriers, and they were postal employees, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
and
true,
obviously
yes,
the postmaster was paid by the government, and because the salaries are published. So my guess is, and it's only a guess, and I stand to be corrected, that a Toronto main post office would have postmaster and several employees and letter carriers. They would be employees of the Canada Post Office. As
Oh, yes, yes,
but then
they were.
you're absolutely correct. The corner store and the drug stores and so on would hire other people, and there was a responsibility of the paid postmaster to train and hire and fire and whatever.
Yeah, so the postmaster was paid a salary and a commission to run the post office and to sell stamps and perform other functions such as
and their budgets were based on their volume. So if the volume went up and they had to hire, they applied for more money to say, I got to hire 2 people to handle the 10,000 letters I get in a day.
Yeah, actually,
there was an earlier question about hand cancels and how nice some are and some are not. If you've ever handled those types of cancels, whether they're just a single strike or if they're on a hammer, if you put 100 letters in front of you by the 10th or 15th or 20th, you get pretty good at it.
Yeah. And Lee, the postmaster's salaries or basic salary or whatever was predicated on the volume of the office. And then there was a consideration for the sales of postage stamps. But there wasn't much commission in that. And as a matter of fact, in 1862, one of the things that you couldn't buy at the post office in Toronto was stamps. They commissioned out the sale of stamps to local retailers and said, we haven't got time to sell stamps at the clerks. We'll receive your mail, but prepaid. Now, it just so happens that one of the biggest retailers happened to be a bookstore right next to the post office on Toronto Street. And guess what? The guy that owned that retail store was the father of the deputy postmaster of Toronto. So again, there's a little bit of family relationships in there. Those are fun stories to look into. But it was a very practical operation.
It's interesting. And we were just in Toronto.
You were.
Apex, yeah. And I probably walked by all these former post office.
And did you visit Toronto's first post office while you were up here? It's still open as a post office today.
I have to say I did not. I was caught at the booth most of the time.
Yeah, it was the last post office in York before York became Toronto. But on March the 6th, 1834, it became Toronto's only post office. And to this day, it's a post office. Now, mind you, in between, it's been a dance studio. It's been vacant property. Because when Toronto's first postmaster got fired, he threw the post office out of his building. So,
okay.
but it's the York Historical Society that's brought it back, and I say today it's a very functioning post office. And if you're visiting Toronto, it's a most worthwhile stop. You walk through that door, and boy, you're back in the 1830s. Wow. It's still got all the same fixtures, and they're still using the same pigeonholes and so on. And there's nothing terribly modern. You don't see a telephone. You do see a cash register.
That's on my Toronto travel list now. I wish I didn't know it when I went there. Lee.
There was
a free visit.
Yeah, there was the curator of the post office, I believe the RPSC, the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, did a video in the last year with the curator of the Toronto First Post Office, and she was talking about her facility and what's there and so on. Might be able to pick that up online.
I'll have to look for that. Duncan, nice to see
Yes,
you.
also talking about Toronto, I remember being at one of the University of Toronto colleges, which is on Harvard Street. Right now, it's sort of in downtown Toronto. And when they moved there, they were asked whether they thought people would travel that far north from the city to go to university. It's something like 3 or 4 subway stops north of Union Station.
Yeah, it's not a lot. A lot of people would walk it. As a matter of fact, walking it today is probably faster than taking.
If I can jump in, well, I just went on Google and Googled Toronto's first post office, and Wikipedia has a page on it, so you might check that out.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
And by the way, Duncan, you would do that as a walk now because they got a major power fail downtown. Somebody turned a barge over downtown and hit the power lines and knocked out the entire downtown core. I don't know if have they got electricity yet, Michelle? You're near the middle of it, aren't you? You're muted. We can't hear you.
I'm one street just past it, so I lucked in. Sorry, I can't tell you.
Hey, I'm coming to the reliability of employees again.
Sure.
We hear about postal work, the postman who doesn't want to deliver the mail, so just stashes it somewhere, and they find like a year's worth of mail hidden in his garage or something. How did the Canadian Post Office have inspectors to make sure that the people who are entrusted with this were actually doing the job they were supposed to do?
Oh, absolutely. And, funny you should mention that. And this is a true story, but I guess, well, just before I sold my business, and I sold in 2007, we had an incident that the restaurant in the building right next to me went to take their garbage out, and their garbage cans were stuffed. They had these honking huge bins with almost like a dumpster, and they're stuffed with mail bags. So the post office was called, and before too long, we had a whole backyard full of police cruisers and post office employees, and the sergeant in charge of the investigation was a chap named Stanley Badge, who just happens to be a member of the West Toronto Stamp Club. And Stan and I looked at the mail and the mail tags, and between the two of us, we were able to identify very quickly that the mail came out of Station D, and we were able to identify the postman, who I believe is still in jail today. But he was fired that day, and he suffered some pretty serious penalties for holding the mail. It was all circular mail, advertising, and so on that should have been on his daily walk. But it was not for our community. He actually came from outside of his walk route to dump all the mail that he'd been stashing in his house for a couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah, they still frown on that. And you'll see with a lot of Canadian mail, they took a lot of care to put the markings on there. For example, Toronto was a great user of the too late hand stamp, and you'll see that on a lot of mail going to Montreal, because the bags were closed at 5:15 in the afternoon to get onto the train, and most businesses stayed open until 6 o'clock. So if they took their mail into the post office after the bag was sealed, it was hit with the receiving mark, but then they put the too late hand stamp on it because it wouldn't be in Montreal the next day. And if any mail that was delayed, the postmaster was personally penalized for late delivery of the mail. So it was a rate, a cover your butt detail, and then you see the letter carrier's hand stamps as well. And he says, "Hey, this is the day I got it. It's not my problem if somebody didn't get it on time, or if it's not my problem if it got delayed before I got it either." So they were covering themselves because they were subject to penalty for late delivery of mail.
In the incident you just described, do you know if any special hand stamp was applied to the material when it was delivered?
I'm not sure it ever got delivered, Michelle. It was
circulars.
It was all circulars, specials that expired a year ago, and sale notices and so on. It was a wealth of material, but I have no idea what happened afterwards. The post office clammed up pretty quickly when I phoned them to try and get some follow up on it, and they just closed ranks.
So just out of curiosity, would the post office compensate the people who sent the circulars out that it was supposed to get delivered?
I would suspect, they would get some kind of compensation for that. Again, I have no way of knowing that, and as I say, they close ranks pretty quickly when you start asking questions about the integrity of the office.
Oh, what an interesting tangent. And you walked a race. You had a 10K before this, Garfield. I admire your energy.
Well, it keeps me going. Fuels the fire.
Yeah. And I told him I'd take a nap before these, and he just ran a race, got in the shower, was right there.
Hey, this is more a silly question. The postcards, that business, the business that were like ads and postcards.
Yeah, the private postcards.
Yeah, were they was that something that certain printing companies specialized in, or was it a?
Oh yeah,
it looks a little like it might be specialized.
Yeah. Each user of private postcards used his own personal printer to have them done. And when I was in the printing business here in Toronto from 1965, no 61 until about 1980, and I can't tell you how many 100 million private postcards we printed in our shop. People still get them for mass mailings. There's all kinds of advertising goes out on postcards, for everything from hardware sales to pizzas and lamps and God only knows what else. There's a huge amount of, matter of fact, if you go online to a company called Vistaprint, they got a whole section for doing private postcards, and it's still a huge going concern. Just that they look a lot prettier now than they did in the 1890s.
Hey, go right ahead.
To add into that question, in early 1898 in Canada and in perhaps 1897 in the US, but certainly around the same time period, several publishers of postcards had apparently it was required. I'm going to read the phrase from Canada because I don't have one in front of me from the United States. On the bottom of the postcard, and I apologize for the bright light, but I have to be able to see, it says, the bottom imprint tells us that the card was manufactured in Canada by an Act of Parliament of Canada. Similar in the States, they use the phrase Act of Congress. And they were found on private mailing cards, which gave the authority to be privately printed. And so if you look for that on those very early pioneer cards, you will see that. And this was instituted in the States first, and then it folded into Canada. But you will find that printing on some very early private postcards on that basis. We have information through the postcard clubs here in Canada, and I'd be prepared to send what I can dig up with the official information on that. But that's just from me pulling out my binder and having a little chit chat.
Have you ever swapped out postcards you had that were not philately interesting, but of interest to the postcard collectors, as a way of refreshing your collection?
Okay, well, if here I have hundreds of cards that are patriotic like this, and I show you this one because it's printed by a Canadian company, but of course it has the US flag on it. So the interest in these is very intense. And it happened in your 1904 St. Louis exhibition, the exhibition in Chicago earlier, and so on, 1895, all these early pioneer cards, if you're interested in, and there is data, and the Toronto Postcard Club has information on its website, as well as other sources. So I'll see if I can get the group some data to just look at, and maybe that could be sent out in an email format.
That would be terrific. Happy to do that.
I know I've seen on the Stamp Auction Network the picture postcards advertised, and they look like they were selling them as the picture postcard, not as a philately, not because of the cancellation or anything else.
Yeah, well, it depends on what rabbit hole you go down. You could use postcards both philately, of which I do, and as well as collecting the postcards themselves from the different publishers, or the different rates, or the different time periods, or the subjects involved, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I've got some perfins, and I don't see them as, I see the stamp as a way just to lead to a story about the company. Like I found a perfin for W.H. Smith, and now I'm interested in it because W.H. Smith was the model for the HMS opera HMS Pinafore. So now I have a story, and I can see the postcards in the same way. because this would be about the company.
It's interesting when you go to a postcard show, you can tell who are the stamp collectors because the boxes are all turned around.
Just a kicker on the private postcards. Here's a copy of the legislation poster that was sent out by the post office department on postcards and dated December the 9th, 1897, and it allowed advertising to be on postcards, and it showed where they could print them, and just happened to have a cover, or sorry, a private postcard dated on December the 9th, 1890. So that's the first day they could ever use it. And that was a Cop Clark, which was a publishing company in Toronto that got it. They had their own printing presses too. So I imagine as soon as that legislation went through, they did it the same day and got some advertising out.
When postcards first started to appear back in, I don't know when, in the 1800s, the post offices in England and probably in Canada seemed to be scared to death about what it would do to the revenue, because you could, if you wrote more than 5 words on it, then it was classified as a higher rate, as a letter or something of this
Letter
sort,
mail.
as letter mail. And then eventually they had to cave into the fact that these things were there for good, and then start making the type of rules and regulations you just showed to bring them into the mainstream.
Well, I think they found, Michelle, that postcards generated a heck of a lot of revenue. Because you'll find, if you go through a box of the early postcards, you'll find that a lot of commercial companies use them to send out to their customers saying that our salesman's going to be in your town on Tuesday next. Please be prepared to receive them and give them your orders. And so the salesman just kept on sending out these cards and saying, hey, I'm going to be here. And I expect a salesman in those days probably did 10 calls a day in a town. So he might have sent 50 postcards a week.
Yeah, that was after the initial shock of these things starting to be used, I think. They really picked up, and then, like you say, the post office was making a good money with postcards deliveries.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the banks were using them too as receipts for deposits, because they could send that for a penny.
Yeah.
So there's any number of them out there that have got the receipt notices on them, and insurance premium notices. There's lots of them saying your premium for the life insurance policy is due, but it wasn't a life insurance policy in those days. It was a fraternal organization, that a benevolent society.
I have one from a private society, the Maccabeans, and what I found out was they were a precursor of the Zionist organization that Lord Balfour ended up. It was tied in with the Balfour. It was about 30 years before Lord Balfour and the Balfour Declaration. So we just history on that one.
I mean, postcards carry a fascinating history of their own, and I wish I'd had time to do postcards too, but that's yours, isn't it, Bob Vogel?
Yeah, I do postcards.
Yeah, I thought so.
I do too much of everything, as you know.
Yeah.
Well, Duncan's coming back and he has his hand up and it looks like he has something to show us.
Yes, I do. The British rules for postcards were quite interesting. I'm thinking of using a few of these to write a column. Sometimes a postcard is not a postcard. Great. I don't know if we can see the first one. That's a postcard used as shipped at printed paper rate because it has fewer than 5 words of greeting on it. And it's the right size to be a postcard. this postcard says printed paper, and it's too large to be a postcard because it's longer than 5 7/8 inches wide. So it can be a postcard, provided it has 5 words or fewer of greeting of a formulaic nature. But this one says something photographs next week. So that was deemed not to be a formula of courtesy or of conventional character, even though it was only 4 words on this one. So it was liable to latter rate of 3 pence, paid 2 pence, 2 pence postage due. So that's 2 examples of when a postcard isn't a postcard.
My favorite is this.
Okay. Oh.
You know, I'm looking at this 1910, and now I'm curious, what happened to that family? Because a lot happened to Germany after 1910, especially the guy with, especially the fellow in uniform. Did he, you know, did he survive the war? How long did he live? And it's postcard, and that's, you know, those picture postcards. Do people do that anymore? Where you make a picture, a family photograph, and you make a postcard of it, and you send that out?
Well, you know, Edward, to partially answer your question, I can't answer any of those specifics, but next week at the West Toronto, we're going to have, and this is an advertisement, by the way. Next week at the West Toronto, we've got a discussion group coming up, and our discussion is going to be based on the social philately of the Victorian period. And I think I saw Colin Clark's on here right now as we speak, and he's going to be doing a presentation for us. And if you want to find out about that kind of stuff, pop me an email. I'll put you on the guest list for the West Toronto and send you an invitation for that meeting. And for those,
are you going to be webinaring it?
It won't be a webinar. It'll just be a regular Zoom meeting. So
I can zoom in on that then.
So you'll be able to zoom in, but
Right.
just write me. It's garfield.porch@gmail.com.
Garfield.porch@gmail.com.
At
Yeah, or just send
gmail.com.
it here and we'll forward it on. Right, Bob?
All righty.
It'd be
Colin,
very-
you had your hands out. Are you going to give a plug for yourself there?
Yes, I'll send out invitations to anybody who wishes to join us, and you get yourself stuck on the permanent guest list. You get invitations whether you want them or not.
Okay. Well, just to close, I also at the flea market in Berlin, a Arbeitsbook for a guy named Emil, for a guy who was born in 1919, and it ends at about 1933. And it's got his jobs he's got 10 jobs. When he started work, it was born in 1909. He started working in 1919, and it was like 10 jobs between over the 10-year period, which says a lot about Germany when he was living. He was a butcher's assistant. And what I want to do is to find out what happened to this person, because, well, he's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if Colin's going to tell you that, but he might tell you how to find out.
Yeah.
I was researching someone who had a German connection, and I knew the town he was in, and I was able to find a genealogical society in the town, and holy smokes, they went out of their way to help me find information. So that might be one route you could follow.
I'm not familiar with German records, but certainly in the United Kingdom and in Canada, if a person was in the military, there's definitely a record and it's easy to trace. So I would, if you suspect that you're in the real picture postcard that you showed us, and there's a military officer somewhere in Germany, there's probably a record. I mean, the records for the soldiers were huge, and they were mostly kept unless place got burned out or bombed out or whatever. But ideally, certainly the UK and Canada have detailed records, and I'm sure America does as well.
Can you give me, pass me on, if I emailed you through Joan, this to finish off an essay, this guy named Lawrence Tipton. He organized an escape from Wisian, a civilian assembly center. That's what they're called, their internment camps. Now, I've been able to find out he wrote a book in 1949, and he was a radio operator in the British Navy, but I have no idea when he died. Since he was born in 1909, it'd be very interesting if he was still alive right now. Since he was in the Royal Navy, would they have records, some records on him?
Royal Navy would.
Yes, absolutely. UK is wonderful for access to military records of all services.
Okay.
Colin, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So, hi everybody. I'm going to be giving the presentation for Garfield on Tuesday night, and it's going to focus on Victorian social philately. It's going to focus primarily on it's exclusively Great Britain social philately, and I'm picking two case studies of two prominent Victorians and delving into the mail as regards how it reached them and things like that. And also the background of the significance of who the addressees are.
That's this Tuesday on what date is that? That's the
17th.
17th. Oh, that's 17th is Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday? Then it'll be the 16th.
The 16th. Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Actually, you're already on the invitation.
I am
list,
on
so-
the invite. Every time, it's funny, I get the synopsis and I forgot to join it. I have to somehow get it onto my calendar so it sticks. So.
And once Garfield, once you get the Zoom link out, I've got 2 or 3 Atlanta stamp collecting club members interested as well. So I'll just forward them the Zoom link.
Oh, that's wonderful, Colin. Yeah, and anybody that does get one of our Zoom links, you're more than welcome to pass them on to anybody. They're open meetings, but we are restricted by Zoom to 100 participants. So the 101st person gets locked out.
Anybody wants to show us something? Duncan, you want to show us something?
No, I'm still looking.
While you do that, can I do a small plug? I'm just on the cusp of finishing a usually they would start at 5. It's a 50-page essay about the civilian assembly camps, and the full rank of them with heavily researched, and actually one of the characters ended up being an advisor to the Vietnamese South president after the war. So that's going to be on my Substack page. It's not philatelic. I literally had one stamp and I've gotten 70 pages worth of material just because I followed the rabbit hole that it led down. And I can't possibly run it as a philatelic item. But Joan, you'll be seeing that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it. It's very nice. I find them very interesting. Garfield, if you start getting close to 100, let me know. I'll give you free access to this, like your own log on, and it's totally your control.
Oh, thanks, Joan. I really appreciate that. We don't normally get 100, but we generally get anywhere from 25 to 50 people that join in and grab in our presentations.
Well, if you start getting up there and you get a little nervous, you could have the keys to our platform. It doesn't, more presentations doesn't increase my price, so you're welcome to it.
Oh, thank you so much. And just as a little aside on that one, the reason that we're doing this as the West Toronto Club is kind of funny. Going into COVID, we'd never heard of Zoom. Nobody had. And we had 86 members in the West Toronto Club, fairly active and so on. And when the balloon went up in 2020, we had to stop holding our meetings at a community center. And after 3 months, we thought, hey, we gotta stay in touch with our club members, and we went to Zoom. And we started doing our discussion group, which is my meeting, and Ian Robertson's learning workshop. And our invitation guest list has now grown to some, I think about 90 people that get the invitation every month. But our membership has gone from 86 to 113. And, we now, for a local club, find ourselves in the funny situation. We have members in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and Chilliwack, BC, and Racine, Wisconsin, and New York, and London, England, and then Fredericton and Halifax. And it kind of spread out our West Toronto club. And we've created a monster now because we can't go back off Zoom. Too many of our members are purely Zoom members, but we love it.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to communicate with people, especially when we're all locked in our houses. I think.
Yeah. So now we have two Zoom meetings a month and two in-person meetings a month.
Oh, that's terrific.
Garfield, your recent dissertation, this dissertation you talked about how a local club has increased members. That story needs to be told nationally and to every club that can possibly get a hold of it. Clubs have folded in Southern Ontario because no one had the capability, the interest, or the desire to expand their knowledge to get online and do this during the pandemic. And kudos to your club to do that. But that story needs to be told in just a few words, a couple of paragraphs. And I would get in touch with Canadian Stamp News, Robitaille, whatever. And that needs to be told because it's so essential to grow the hobby further and prevent the decay that potentially is occurring. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, you're right, Lee. And I think that one of the lessons that we learned out of it is that a stamp club just can't sit on its hands and expect that people will come. You've got to give people a reason to be there. And if you give people a good reason and give them a good program, they're going to be there in spades. You will get a whole lot of support. And we didn't intend it to work this way, but we're certainly delighted with the outcome. We just didn't see it coming.
Well, Lee, we offered our services to any club that needed help with Zoom, like free of charge, and we still do. There's a couple clubs that take advantage of it, but anyone who wants to, you'll find. I'm sure Garfield's the same way. I'm willing to help anybody, and Rob, we're willing to help anybody or any club who wants to try and use the platform. And it's very easy to use once you get over that intimidation. And it always helps to just do a little bit of partnering, and then they get comfortable, and then they just go off on their own.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's also an advantage I've seen to Zoom as compared to live meetings. Right now, we are all on the same level. Somebody in the lower left corner speaks, and I can hear them, I can see them. Whereas when you're sitting in a room, an auditorium, whoever's two people to the left of you is having a conversation, you're not part of it. And the other thing too, if you're recording this meeting, you just press a button. At the PSSC, before the pandemic, we tried to start recording our meetings and with cameras and that sort of thing and editing afterwards. And it just was a great big pain, and we won't say where to do. Whereas here, you press a button. And the other day, I will be absent for the PSSC meeting this next Wednesday, but I recorded myself giving that retro reveal presentation using Zoom. I made a meeting of one person, me, and then I took the screen share, and then there's a hidden button there. You go on YouTube and some 13-year-old will explain to you how to do it. You press that button, and then now you're recording your Zoom presentation, and when you're done, you stop it. And now it says, what do you want to do with it? Well, I want it saved to my hard drive, and saves it to your hard drive. It's a tremendous platform for, for philately. And I wasn't a member of the West Toronto Stamp Club because to get there, it's an hour and a half by the Toronto transit system when it's working. So here I sit in my, my office. I have my favorite drink, pet the cat, chase out the dog or whatever. I'm home doing it. So I think Zoom is here to stay.
I agree with you. The Collectors Club, I almost got kicked out because I made them go on Zoom. Now they're like Zoom monsters. They can't have enough Zoom meetings, which is great. I mean, that's exactly what you wanted. But I mean, when the pandemic first, my major was, I'm a master's degree in technology management. So when the pandemic began, I already had the game plan because I've done distributed groups for practically all my career with IBM and so on. So I was like, this is easy peasy, guys. And they're like, no, we can't do this. I'm like, yeah, you can. It's really easy. And after a couple of teeth pulling, they want everything. They're perfect. So I was like, all right, then it's a TV production. You have a script. This is a script. We follow the script and we rehearse. And everything comes out fine. And I hired for that one, we have a professional videographer. But, for this, the cost of membership here is $0. So, you get what you get. I mean, I don't think anyone is really interested. I don't think a $500 videographer would enhance what you get out of a meeting like this. So
Well, Joan, I get more than my money's worth out of these meetings. I'll tell you, they're great.
I wanted to thank you, Garfield, for in your presentation how you actually truly do the education part.
I'm married to a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, when you're explaining the different marks, it's like sometimes in presentations, I feel like the collector just brought all their stuff in, poured it out on the table, and started talking about it one by one, without having given thought to actually doing a presentation. But you gave a thought to it, clearly.
Thank you.
And the other thing, Joan, that woman who sent you from the American Philatelic Society about essays about Britain. All right, my essay won't work for her because it's 2 pages on the stamp and 10 pages on the company. So
okay,
they're
lost.
Yeah, and
we tried.
They're going to be doing something on perfins coming up. Okay. So anybody here who's ever got any interesting perfins you want to do a short essay about, you have the contact information.
Yeah, see, APS. Most of these people, the APS is always plugging for articles. So, as are most clubs.
So yeah, I'm not sure. It's maybe in the autumn they're talking about, but something on perfins. I know Canada's got some interesting perfins, and Britain's got some interesting perfins. My interest in perfins is always the company afterwards. So I can't do a philatelic essay about a perfin. That's just, I get it.
So the other thing we've been doing here at the British Empire Group is I've been reaching out to non-philatelists.
Yeah.
And when I look at who attends the meeting, I'd say I get like 40 people who are just not on any philatelic role. And we try to encourage them to see philately in a different way and sort of suck them into the dark side. But there's always a common interest, if you're like with this Toronto history, it's great. We had a gal who early on, one of our early ones, who did the Victorian when the mail started and how the penny black or the penny post really just revolutionized the mail from the societal perspective.
Yeah.
So I think this cross-pollination will help bring in new people. Younger people is a different challenge. I think, so one task at a time.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm finding that stamps are more like a gate, the garden gate. the garden's always more interesting than the gate. But you can tell it's a garden gate and not a house gate. So you have some idea to walk through.
Well, Garfield, have we kept you up too late? Oh, sorry, Mike.
No, I've still got I never go to bed before 2. I generally tend to do my stamps between 10 and 2 a.m. So that way there's very few interruptions and no Zoom meetings and no telephone calls, and the bar is open.
Ooh.
It's 2 meters to my right.
I've been putting forward something that some people might find a little strange, that advanced philatelists especially maybe should consider themselves in a different light. And the people from the West Toronto this morning, please, you've heard this before. I see ourselves as philatelic archaeologists. We're not digging stuff out of the ground. We're digging stuff out of dealers' boxes or heaven knows where. And just like an archaeologist, we have an artifact in our hand, an artifact that can be studied. It's got all these strange things on it. It's got people's names, people's addresses, and then how did that artifact get from there to wherever it was going, and what was it doing? And if we can convince, especially the recent retired people who are looking for a hobby to do, show them that aspect that, okay, you're interested in whatever this artifact or that other artifact is that deals with philately, we might be able to get more, especially newer retired people. The average retirement age in Canada for males is 82, 85 for women. And most people are going to be retired 20, 30 years. They're looking for something to do. A lot of them are graduates of probably universities somewhere, have the skill and the background to do something with these things. It's a matter of how do you convince them that, these artifacts from your town might be interesting. These artifacts from this company might be interesting. These artifacts produced by a certain organization might be interesting. Enough preaching.
Yeah, well, what you're talking a little bit is surface finds. This is redware. It was produced in central France, but it was found in York, in the UK. This is greyware. This was produced far to the south. It tells you something about the farmer. They were well enough. This was like the bone china of their time. They were doing well because they got to have this red clay, rich in iron with a wash of iron. That's how it got this red look. That tells you the family was doing well enough to have some really nice pottery. And your postcards point that way. A good advertisement points to it like they were doing well enough to go and find out a good printer to really get a good design that when you got it in the mail, you were like looking at it like, wow, okay, that's interesting to see.
Yeah, so Michael, one of the things I wanted to do is reach out to the history professors and history departments and but you need their program and try to link their talks to telling the history through philately. And I'd love to meet some textbook writers and stuff like that and try to get them, when they're writing their textbooks, to include some philatelic artifacts, just so people want to say, oh, that was interesting. So anyway, I think there's a lot we could do as a community to do that. Duncan.
Yes, I had my hand up. I was trying to do some research as people watched, and I had 3 sources. And I've come to the conclusion that the Americans and the British Post Office use different conversion factors to convert the UPU postcard dimensions into inches. Because the inch is one of the units that is actually common between America and the UK, unlike the fluid ounce. But the British rates for 1959 Post Office Guide are the same for international and overseas postcards, and the implication is they're the UPU rate, and the Americans have slightly very slightly different dimensions for their UPU postcards internationally. And then in '63, the inland US postcard became the same size as a UPU postcard.
Is there any reason why they chose a particular size?
I could speculate, but
okay, go for it.
In later years, it was the size that wouldn't mess up the letter-facing machines. In the earlier size, it's probably ones that wouldn't get trapped in something else.
Yeah, why I asked that is that I've been at well, in particular was a similar presentation on airmails, and everybody was talking about, well, this airmail rate and that airmail rate, and then I sort of caused a panic when I said, well, how did they calculate the airmail rate? How did they come up with the idea that 1 ounce letter is 15 cents? And nobody had ever gone back and looked at that. And I think that's one aspect maybe of our hobby that is missing, is why were certain things put into place?
Actuaries might have been involved with some of those rates.
Yeah, like, why is a letter to Hong Kong or Portuguese Macau cheaper than a letter to China in the good old days when we were allowed to do such things?
Well, in postal rates started by the distance that the horse and carriage had to travel or the rider had to travel. But it was when the UPU was formed in 1869 or whatever it was, 1849. It was 50. No, it was
1869 was the Treaty of Berne.
That's right, 1869. So not every country joined at that time, and so there were higher rates to non-members, no delivery to some. There was, it was all over the map. So the study of rates is a lifetime endeavor in itself. But ideally, those countries that are members of UPU all had to fall into line, and as technology improved, rates declined through the early 1900s, and then they were pretty static until airmail was created, and so on and so forth. Rural fire delivery, and like as countries grew and as populations grew and as mail volumes increased and mechanical mail was being processed through machines and so on. So it's a huge study, and yeah, you've got a lot of years to cover if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Actually, to that very point, Lee, the funny thing is that with the Treaty of Berne in 1860, now up until then, the rate from Canada to the UK was 6 cents, but the Treaty of Berne reduced the transatlantic rate to 5 cents, but Canada was not invited to. Matter of fact, Canada was specifically excluded from that meeting at Berne, because we're merely a colony of Great Britain. And therefore the rate was left at 6 cents from Canada to England, whereas from the United States, it was 5 cents to England. And the British Parliament then passed a concessionary rule stating that the 5 cent rate would be extended to Canada. So, and then very shortly after that, before we were invited in 1875, Germany jumped on board because they didn't think it should cost more to send a letter to Germany than it did to England. So they amended their postal rates for Canada as well. So it's it's a study of politics and legislation and practicality.
My favorite story is that the rate to the US was at the British Empire rate until 1957. Unfortunately, when you look at it, it was introduced in 1900 something or other, before my collecting interest. So my story that was because they mailed the Declaration of Independence to London and it took that long to get there is absolutely false. But
it was all around the 1898 imperial penny postage and the creation of a standard postage rate in the British Empire. And for instance, New Zealand joined later. The Australian states, of course, were states, and Australia wasn't Australia yet, and so on and so forth. And Union of South Africa didn't exist; it was all colonies. So the famous Canadian map stamp was the tie, the rope that bind, at least the British Empire, and the rates of mail around the empire.
And in 1971, the British increased the domestic rates in February and the overseas rates on the 1st of July. So there was a period in which it was cheaper to send a postcard to Canada than across the street.
And we had the same thing when the imperial penny postage came in December 25th, 1898. The imperial rate dropped to 2 cents, but the domestic rate was still 3 cents. So in fact, on December the 26th, it was cheaper to send a letter to London, England from Toronto than it was to send a letter to London, Ontario from Toronto. So there was a 1 week period there where our domestic rate was greater than the imperial rate.
Was it, okay, first, was it less expensive to send mail between large cities than from, say, than to smaller, more remote locations with?
No, because the rates were all standardized.
I don't, in terms of to the post office, I mean, not to the customer. Because one of the things I'm impressed by with a standard rate is you can send a letter to some place that to the far, something so far north of in Alaska that you might 2 feet away or in Russia for the same rate you can from New York to Newark, and that's the math on that is interesting.
Well, the math is incredible. For Eureka is the furthest north post office in Canada, and it's so far north. I mean, there's only 17 people used to live there, and it was a weather station, and yet the single domestic letter rate was the rate that applied. They had to fly a single letter there on an airplane. That was the rule. But that's standardized rates in the country for you. Anywhere within Canada, the letter rate in 1870 was 3 cents.
And one wonders why the United States Post Office is in a huge deficit, and the Canadian Post Office is basically the same. It's again time and money and effort, and Canada's a very large country, and Garfield's absolutely right. It costs the same 92 cents to send a letter to Edmonton, Mackenzie River, Toronto, or my next door neighbor.
In the good old days, that when I was young, it was a 4 cent drop letter rate and a 5 cent out of town rate. So one of the people at the church who, if he forgot to give my father a check one week, he'd mail it from his office in Toronto for 5 cents, and it would arrive after he sees him the next Sunday. Whereas if he'd post it in town, it would get delivered the next day.
Anyway, excuse me, I have to leave.
Okay.
This month is the last super moon of 2022, and it's just about to rise. See you next month. Thank you.
All right, well.
Have a good one, Bob.
Yeah.
Well, I'll email you, and then I'll email you about the webinar the Zoom next week. And by the way, that's probably going to get you more than the usual, because it does sound like it makes your trip to the miscellaneous bin at a flea market a lot more interesting when you pull out the postcards and now you realize you have a piece of postal social history.
Garfield, thank you again. I know it's getting late for everybody, and I have to feed my dog who's looking at me, and my husband, who enjoyed the talk. He didn't understand the 2 cent rate. You said the 2 cent rate from Canada to internal Canada, and then Toronto to Toronto, and then the 2 cent rate to the United States. Like he says, he'll talk to you about that later.
Okay, so actually the rate study in Toronto is a fascinating rate study, and it's all the Canadian rates, but we just happen to have some interesting happenstances where there are post offices that are on the borders of Toronto, and So it was a concessionary rate. It was an
Okay.
informal rate concocted between postmasters.
Okay, because you picked up on that right away. So anyway, but thank you again. Thank you very much. This is fantastic.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's fun to be able to pontificate and let people know what I collect, because when people know what I collect, they tell me that they got it. So thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity for to speak again.
Oh, you're always welcome. So,
Yes,
Rob?
there was discussion at one show as to whether a collection of 13 colonies mail should have got the Best British North America award, because it was at the time.
Hey, why not? There's a good argument there, Duncan. An
Yes.
awfully good argument.
Yep. I think that's a subject for a Zoom talk, right? No, we all want to stay friends.
Yeah, you do the research, Duncan. I'll sit back and watch next time. Hey, this is the fun of what we do, is that people go down these rabbit holes, and rabbit holes create some fascinating results sometimes. My whole Toronto thing was a rabbit hole. Started 25 years ago.
There's someone rewriting the book on British Express mail, and I've sent pictures of 3 covers, which the previous author said that she'd never found. And then I found an earlier one, so mine are copies 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4 of 0 known, 0 reported. Sorry.
My rabbit hole with that perfin got me discussing the silver standard in China and Japan, and the 1934 Silver Acquisition Act, which really destroyed a few economies. But I even did the actual silver weights of the respective dollars.
Now, we had a West Toronto meeting one last year, and we discussed rabbit holes, and actually it went on to 2 weeks of discussing rabbit holes, and I think you were there for a few of them, Richard. I think you created a rabbit hole or two.
Is he also a psychologist?
Well, what psychologists are. They're guys that grab habits out of rats. That's a great hobby, and thank God we can enjoy it the way we do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Okay, going once. Are we gonna all ready to say goodbye to Garfield?
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Rob, my co-host. We're gonna get Rob to speak soon too.
And thank you for 19 of you for hanging in.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, Anne. Nice to see you.
Oh, I've been here all evening.
Well, you're not on video, so I'll always see, sometimes people put it on and go away. So
I'm in Nova Scotia, so it's 10 o'clock at night, and my cat and I go to bed between 9 and 9:30. So I don't put the video on because we're in the dark. We're gonna catch the 10 o'clock news and turn out the light.
Terrific. You have a show coming up there.
Yes, we do, and we have Novapex next Friday. I'll be heading into Dartmouth for the whole weekend.
Oh, that sounds great. I wish I could go, but I'm not allowed to travel.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah,
Garfield, now that I've got Garfield here, I was just going to mention, you mentioned the Lee Street office was rare. Pieces from the was it Lee Street that was rare?
Yeah, Lee Avenue. It's
Lee Avenue. Okay, and you showed one piece of mail that wasn't yours, and it was addressed to Augusta Avenue.
Okay, yeah, and that was Kim O'Slomonen's postcard. Yep.
Okay, I have a painting of the house at 91 Augusta Avenue that was done in the 1970s. It was a Victorian red brick row house. And it's a large watercolor, 2 feet by 3 feet, that was done by a Toronto artist, but it's long gone. It's now a condominium or apartment building there. It was 9193 Augusta Avenue. It was like a duplex Victorian red brick, you know, two houses joined. Quite a large watercolor of it. And when I don't hear much mention of Augusta Avenue, and when I saw that, the bells began to ring in the back of my mind. And I realized it's the painting. I have a townhouse and I have a loft on the 3rd floor, and it's like a half story. So the hallway in my 2nd floor is 2 stories high, and I have it hanging on the wall upstairs.
Oh, lovely.
It's it's long gone, but I hadn't thought of Augusta Avenue for the longest time. I think it's in the Kensington Market District, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yep. And you were right about Shoppers Drug Mart. We have a Shoppers Drug Mart here in Wolfville. I live in a very small town in Nova Scotia, Joan, in the Annapolis Valley. So I'm about an hour from Halifax. And we have a Shoppers Drug Mart with a post office right next door to the post office.
Yeah. So if you want to get service, you go to the Shoppers Drug Mart. And if you want,
Well, I tend to use the main post office. Our town is so small, we don't have door-to-door delivery. Everybody goes to the post office and gets their mail from a little box in the lobby, even during the pandemic. So we still troop off to town once or twice a week to get the mail.
oh, that's fun. Yeah, that's what made, I think, the early study of Toronto post office fascinating, is that everybody in Toronto had to go into 126 Adelaide Street to pick up their mail. And so the postmaster knew everybody. It wasn't it was the clerks. It was the postmaster who knew everybody.
I mean, you meet people at the post office. I mean, I've made appointments to meet people at the post office during the pandemic in particular. Somebody wanted to give me something, or I had a dozen pickle jars for a friend and she had pickles for me, and well, I'll meet you at the post office on Tuesday, regular time. And you go get your mail. And there is a small satellite post office in the student union at Acadia, but that's it. The Shoppers Drug Mart, everybody in town, all their parcels and pickup mail is in the post office, and all the rural routes get their mail at the Shoppers. They come into town to pick up it. If they don't have a community mailbox, some of them still don't have community mailboxes. They prefer the rural delivery. And a lot of people still have rural delivery just outside of town, even including my son-in-law's grandparents, well into their 80s. But if they get a parcel too big for their rural mailbox, they have to go into the Shoppers Drug Mart to get it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the wonderful stories that come out of the post offices and the way the post offices run.
Oh, we're about 40 years behind down here in all sorts of things. Zoom hasn't caught on here because most of our members are retired and they live in very rural areas, and you don't have high-speed internet. You've either got to pick it up off your cell phone or pick it off a satellite. I know people that only have satellite service for internet, and you can't really Zoom for an hour on that sort of thing. And almost all of our members are scattered all the way from, Windsor to Digby and the South Shore. We've got people from Bridgewater and Chester that come up. We have three clubs here in Nova Scotia. The Nova Scotia Club, which meets right in the heart of Halifax, and our club, which meets in Port Williams between Wolfville and Kentville, and then the South Shore Club meets in Bridgewater. I'm a member of all three. I very, very seldom go into the city though, because I'm not used to driving in the city anymore. We call it the city. I know. I mean, I remember, 20 years ago, I was driving on the 401 and Highway 27, but not now. And even driving into Halifax is a challenge.
I wanted to say Deep River's advanced quite a bit since peace broke out. We no longer collect mail from the office of the censor. Because it was a gated community and all the mail was censored, and you picked up your mail at the censor.
Wow.
When was that, Duncan?
1944 to 45 during Manhattan Project.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
That was the nuclear laboratories, and you had to be an employee to live in the town.
Wow.
And all the mail incoming and outgoing was censored.
That is so neat.
At least
Things
it
you-
wasn't to an obscure post office box in what was the city in New Mexico, and one of the catalog companies says, "But we've already sent 30 catalogs this month to that post office box. How many people are using that post office box?" And it was the secure secret post office box for Los Alamos.
Ah, that is so neat. I love Nova Scotia. I think it's so pretty. Yeah.
I was West Coast Navy, and the weather was better there.
Yeah. Well, are we ready to say goodnight? I'm not going to hang up till the last person leaves. Thank you,
Okay,
Colin.
okay.
I am going to try to put that on my calendar, and and then usually what happens is I send myself a reminder, but I don't send the Zoom link, and then I have to try to find the Zoom link, and I get lost.
Well, I think I'll send it the Zoom link tonight in all likelihood for next Tuesday. I don't like to send it too early because people forget about it, and
Yeah.
if it's too late, the meeting's already over. So
Well, that's the funny thing is like I always see your reminder, of the like this is the wrap up. This is what we discussed. I'm like, golly, I wish I wish I put it on my calendar so I got the reminder. The Zoom meeting, that's one of the advantages of it is people get you can set it up so they get the 1 week, 2 week, it's starting in an hour reminder, which people like me who tend to forget, like I get a lot of stupid stuff put on my work calendar that isn't really relevant. So reminders like that are helpful for me. But
I'll send you reminders.
I really like getting the reminder the night before and then an hour before, because I get engrossed in something and I would, forget it's kind of in the back of my mind, and then I would forget till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's the other reason we keep the sign in for this open all the way through the meeting, because when it first started, it's like once it starts, you can't log in. I'm like, oh, that's awful because people don't have time for that. This is a hobby. This should be fun. This isn't a top secret board meeting.
Hey Garfield, what time is early? What time early can I log on with you to do a quick test?
How about 6:45? Is that okay?
That sounds perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I usually open it up about 15 to 20 minutes before the meeting, and
Yeah,
we can play around a bit and
we'll
make sure.
test the visual and test the audio. Cool.
Look forward to it, Colin. I'm really looking forward to that presentation.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So I'll send out the invites tonight and then send everybody a reminder on Monday. I just got to put a reminder to remind everybody.
Yeah, well, I always schedule them so they go off automatically, but
I just got this 80-year-old memory that I don't quite trust all the time. Mind you, I haven't trusted it for 60 years. So
at work, we used to have a big rush to get things done by the 31st of March. And so I scheduled something that wasn't due till June so that it would be sent on the 1st of April. But then I was told, well, you seem to have forgotten, though, that the people receiving what's due on the 31st of March don't actually check it all until the 5th of April. So the standing joke is that we've got the 32nd, 33rd, 34th, 35th of March to actually send them to them.
Beautiful.
So sending my thing that wasn't due till June should have been waited till the 10th of April.
Well, did you ever stop to think that if it wasn't for the last minute, nothing would ever get done?
Well,
So with that perverse thought,
yeah.
Someone said the reason I did overnight security at stamp shows was thought I could spend the time from 6 o'clock when most people went home until 6 in the morning, actually finishing mounting the last few pages.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, I should say good night.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
And thanks again, Joan. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Garfield. And Colin, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Hopefully I'll remember. I'm not, because I love social philately.
It'll be good.
It will be good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So we'll see you next week.
Right. Good night, Ann.
Thank you,
See
Ann.
you then.
Good night.
Thank you, David.